The star cruiser Orion shuddered, its engines screaming a symphony of failing systems. Alex, strapped into the pilot's seat, braced for impact. Warnings painted his cockpit bloody red, the proximity alert a banshee wail. It had been a milk run, a routine scouting mission to chart a lifeless, resource-rich asteroid belt, or so they thought. Now, yanked from hyperspace by an unknown gravitational anomaly, hurtling towards a planet that sensors couldn't even classify, this was so far beyond standard operating procedure it made his head spin. When the Orion's hull finally met the atmosphere, it was a cacophony of ripping metal and shattering glass. Alex's world became a blur of fire and flailing limbs. Then, blessed darkness. He came to in fits, coughing up mouthfuls of ash. Systems screamed offline somewhere nearby. Pain, dull at first, then sharp as white-hot splinters, bloomed across his body. He was alive, that much was obvious. He was alone, probably, and was most definitely not where he belonged. Alex pried his eyes open. Twisted metal beams of the Orion's remains cast strange, elongated shadows in what passed for daylight. A sickly yellow sun barely pierced a haze of what looked disconcertingly like smog. Off to his right, a verdant expanse stretched towards a horizon lined with jagged rock formations. Jungle, maybe? It was dense, too dense to see much of anything. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision, just a flicker. Whatever was out there, it was watching him. He forced himself upright, wincing at the flare of protesting muscles. His survival pack had miraculously cushioned some of the impact. Medkit, field rations, and his trusty pulse rifle secured with a magnetic latch on his hip, intact, at least. One less thing to worry about amidst the sea of unknowns. No time to unpack the how and the why of this disaster. Alex knew the drill. Assess, adapt, survive. First order of business, find a defensible position. The wreckage of the Orion wasn't it. Exposed. Too many potential sightlines obscured by the deformed superstructure. He hobbled towards the tree line, every muscle on fire. His eyes darted about, seeking threats within the alien foliage. With no intel on local flora and fauna, the rule was simple. Assume everything is out to kill you. He couldn't shake the feeling he wasn't alone. A noise, low and guttural, made him freeze. Something big moved amidst the ferns, the vibrant green fronds trembling in its wake. Alex slowly lowered himself to a crouch, pulse rifle sliding off his hip and into his waiting hands. Decades of combat training kicked in, muscle memory taking over. The creature exploded from the foliage, a grotesque quadruped all muscle and teeth. Dull brown hide hung loosely over a bulbous body and a head that was all snapping jaws. Alex fired on instinct, pulse blast searing the air with the smell of ozone. The impact threw the beast backwards, but didn't kill it. It screeched a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound and contorted its body, preparing for another charge. 2 more bursts from Alex's rifle finally silenced the thing. He stood, breath ragged in his chest, staring down at the twitching corpse. So, not bulletproof. Good to know. His heart thundered in his ears, the adrenaline rush finally subsiding. First blood. His. He scanned the tree line again. Nothing. For now. But after that howl, there was no way he was alone out here. Alex hefted his rifle, a grim determination settling over him. Whatever this planet had in store, he'd fight. If there was one thing Alex was good at, one thing that had kept him alive for this long, it was outlasting the bastards that wanted him dead. Alex took a precious moment to examine the carcass. Thick hide, dense muscle, and a mouth ringed with teeth meant for tearing, not chewing. A carnivore, and a big one. Not the apex predator, he suspected. No, that probably belonged to whatever had made that blood-curdling howl. But this thing had been ambush hunting, a testament to the lethal efficiency of this alien ecosystem. He needed cover, and he needed it fast. The dense vegetation was an unreliable defense. Too many shadows, too many places for things to hide. He made a break for the rocky crags, scrambling over roots and loose soil, his battered body screaming protest. The first outcropping of stone offered some respite. Large, angular boulders piled atop one another, creating natural alcoves and narrow crevasses. Imperfect, but better than nothing. Alex clambered up, choosing a spot with a view back towards the tree line and a narrow entry point he could easily defend. He took stock, forcing down the rising panic. Rations, check. Ammunition, enough, but not unlimited. His medkit had taken some damage. He'd have to be sparing with his stims. He pulled a handheld scanner from his pack. Useless. It wasn't registering any known life forms or energy signatures. Whatever had pulled the Orion out of hyperspace had scrambled long-range comms, too. Great. Completely cut off and blind. A snap of a twig made Alex whirl, rifle raised. Nothing. Just the wind rustling dry leaves somewhere below. Or maybe not. His instincts, honed over the years in some of the galaxy's worst hellholes, were screaming at him. He wasn't alone. As if on cue, a cacophony of screeches and growls erupted from the tree line. Not one predator this time. A pack. The gleam of too many eyes reflected the sickly sunlight filtering through the thick canopy. Alex counted at least 5 of those hulking brown monstrosities circling the base of the rocks, sniffing the air. Hunger gleamed in their eyes. They seemed to know exactly where he was, the cowards. Circling, assessing, not quite daring to charge. They'd learned from their fallen comrade, it seemed. Bulletproof they weren't. But smart? Maybe too smart for his liking. He couldn't stay here. This was a siege, and he wasn't built for those. He'd have to force their hands, and his options were limited. Distraction? Too open. One misstep and he'd be shredded. Then it clicked. He checked the integrity of his pulse rifle and then, with practiced ease, ejected the spent energy cell and reached for a spare. He fiddled with it until he deliberately triggered the overload protocol. It began to whine, pulse with a dangerous, unstable rhythm. His homemade grenade. Alex stood, feigning bravado he didn't feel, and lobbed the sizzling energy cell towards the largest of the creatures. At the last moment, they scattered, but it was too late. The cell detonated in a shower of scorching sparks, and a collective shriek pierced the air, a mix of fury and pain. His chance. Alex sprinted across the rocks, ignoring the stabs of pain in his leg. The howls followed, a disorienting symphony, but he kept moving. He wasn't looking for cover. He needed the opposite, an open field, a place where he could see them coming. A sudden drop almost sent him tumbling. He skidded to a halt, peering over the edge of a sheer cliff. A river snaked through the valley below, wide and glistening. A gamble, but he didn't have many plays left. First the rifle, then his pack. He tossed them over the edge with practiced aim, wincing as they disappeared into the rushing water below. One last look back at the tree line, at the glowing eyes, and Alex took a running leap. The wind whipped past his ears as he fell, and then the shocking cold of the river as it swallowed him whole. He resurfaced, gasping, struggling against the surprisingly powerful current. The pulse blasts and enraged roars of the hunting pack grew more distant with each stroke. Relief warred with the fresh surge of panic. Out of the frying pan, into the fire, he'd never exactly been a strong swimmer. The river, though, offered its own harsh form of survival. It carried him downstream, away from those hulking beasts. Each ragged breath was a small victory. But the current was relentless and the water numbingly cold. Sooner or later, his strength would give out. Just when the darkness began to creep into the edges of his vision, he spotted it. A fallen tree, its massive trunk snagged across the width of the river, creating a natural dam. With a final burst of desperate energy, Alex pulled himself onto its gnarled surface, shivering uncontrollably. From his sodden perch, he watched the tree line, searching for any sign of pursuit. Nothing moved, save the strange foliage swaying and dipping under the relentless pressure of the wind. He was alone, at least for now. Alex struggled to catch his breath. Exhaustion pulled at him like a physical weight. Every muscle in his body burned, and the cuts and bruises he'd sustained in the crash and subsequent scramble pulsed with fresh agony. Alive, yes, but utterly stranded. He fumbled in his sodden pockets and fished out a crushed ration bar, forcing himself to eat. He'd need every ounce of energy to see this through. Where the river would take him, he didn't know. But even the unknown was better than the certain death that waited on its banks. Hours passed, or was it days? Time blurred as Alex clung to the makeshift raft, propelled downstream by the tireless river. He drifted in and out of a painful, feverish doze, haunted by the growls of the brown monstrosities and the deafening crash of the Orion. Whenever he managed to open his eyes, it was the same relentless green canopy, the same unforgiving landscape. His strength waned and the chill seeped into his bones. Hunger gnawed at his insides as his meager rations ran out. Even if the river did carry signs of civilization, how much longer would he last? A break in the foliage finally drew his attention, a glint of something other than green and brown. A colossal structure, half submerged in the river, loomed in the distance. It was man-made, or at the very least, not crafted by nature. Its smooth, angular lines and metallic sheen were at odds with the tangled wilderness surrounding it. Salvation, or another deadly trap? Alex didn't have the luxury of choice. He coaxed his battered body to work, guiding his makeshift raft towards the structure by using a splintered branch as a makeshift oar. As he drew closer, the sheer scale of it became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a building. It was the wreckage of something enormous, a space vessel of unidentifiable origin. With the last of his waning strength, Alex breached his raft on a muddy bank near the wreckage. Something here must have pulled the Orion out of hyperspace, scrambled his comms. The possibility both terrified and exhilarated him. Answers must lie within, and maybe, just maybe, a ticket home. Alex found a partially collapsed entrance, where had once been a massive airlock now pried open by some unimaginable force. Dark recesses beckoned within, promising answers, but also the potential for a whole new horror show. It was a gamble, but after surviving this long on pure grit, he wasn't about to shy away. The interior of the vessel was a labyrinth of warped metal corridors and sparking, exposed wiring. The air hung heavy with the smell of ozone and something sickly sweet, decay. Alex navigated cautiously, pulse rifle ready in his damp hands. His boots slipped on the surfaces slick with condensation, the only sounds the echo of his own ragged breath and the faint hum of failing systems somewhere deeper within the vessel's guts. And then, voices, or something crudely approximating them. Hisses, clicks, and guttural snarls that sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He ducked into a side corridor, pressing his back against the cool metal. They were moving closer. From the echo of their footsteps, at least 3, maybe more, their forms finally emerged from the gloom, tall, skeletal creatures with translucent skin and gleaming, oversized craniums. Their limbs ended in wickedly curved claws. They carried no discernible weapons. Their bodies themselves seemed designed to kill. Alex held his breath as they passed, their predatory gazes sweeping over his hiding spot, yet somehow missing it. Once the echoes faded, he staggered after them, his mind whirling. Those creatures, whatever they were, they'd brought him here. They'd brought down the Orion. But why? He found his answers soon enough. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. There, strapped to crude operating tables, were the other members of his crew, alive, at least for now, but clearly ravaged, mutilated. And above them, the skeletal creatures moved with mechanical precision, using tools that had no place in any medical textbook Alex had ever seen. A scream tore from Alex's throat before he could stop it. All pretense of stealth disappeared in the face of overwhelming shock and fury. He charged into the chamber, pulse rifle blazing. The skeletal things shrieked in surprise, their movements thrown into disarray. Energy bolts vaporized flesh and bone, but they were relentless, too many of them. Alex focused on liberating his crewmates, familiar faces now masks of terror and pain. One by one, he blasted their restraints, yelling at them to move, to get up, to fight. But these were broken men, victims of horror beyond understanding, and Alex, one soldier against an army, couldn't protect them all. His pulse rifle clicked empty. The last of his crew had been dragged off, screaming into the darkness of the surrounding corridors. He tossed the useless weapon aside and drew the combat blade strapped to his thigh. It was brutal, primal, down to hand, the kind of combat he usually avoided. But today, there was no avoiding the bloody reality. One of the skeletal abominations lunged, its clicking shriek filling the chamber. Alex sidestepped, slashing. The blade bit deep, severing tendons and sinew, but the thing barely seemed to notice. It clawed back, raking its nails across his chest and sending a spray of blood across his vision. Pain exploded across his torso, fueling him as much as it hindered him. He ducked another swipe, his legs buckling from the earlier injury. He was losing this fight, and he knew it. But damn it, he wasn't going down without ripping out a few of their throats first. He roared, a primal battle cry that echoed through the steel tomb, and plunged his blade deep into the glowing cavity exposed amidst the attacker's mangled ribs. The creature finally collapsed with a wet gurgle. Alex wrenched his blade free and whirled to face the next challenger, only to be thrown backwards by an unseen force. He hit the ground, hard, gasping. One of the remaining creatures stood before him, its oversized cranium pulsating sickeningly, emanating an eerie luminescence. It had no weapon, yet Alex had been sent flying, some manner of telekinesis, perhaps. Great. Alex scrambled to his feet, a desperate plan forming in his mind. This thing, it was clearly in command. If he could kill it, the rest might falter, or at least be momentarily disoriented, buying him time to escape. With a bellow of defiance, he charged. The creature's pulsating skull flashed, and once again, Alex was hurled backwards. This time, he smashed into an exposed control panel, showering himself in sparks. Pain bloomed across his ribs, cracked, maybe broken, and his vision flickered. The odds were getting worse by the second. Desperate, Alex searched his surroundings. His eyes fell on a bundle of exposed wires torn loose from the damaged panel. Could he turn their weapon against them? It was a long shot, but he was fresh out of better options. With a speed born of desperation, Alex launched himself forward again. The creature pulsed in preparation for another telekinetic blast. But this time, Alex didn't aim for its fragile body. Instead, he lunged for the exposed wires, jamming his combat knife straight into sparking tendrils. Electricity surged through him, his senses overloading. He shrieked in agony but held on tight, his vision dimming to white-hot pain. And then it was over. The creature shrieked too, an awful screech that died into a gurgle as its body convulsed and slumped to the floor, taking Alex with it. He lay there, panting, the scent of burned flesh and ozone choking the air, his body buzzing with the aftermath of the surge. As his vision slowly cleared, he registered movement around him. The remaining skeletal creatures stood frozen, their movements hesitant, confused. He had done it. For a few precious moments, the balance of power shifted. Alex pushed himself up on trembling arms, his blade dripping crimson. They watched him with narrowed eyes, and for the first time, Alex saw a flicker of something like fear in those ghastly sockets. Without their leader, they were disorganized, vulnerable. Alex let out a guttural roar, the warrior finally eclipsing the man. This was his planet now. These were his beasts, and they would learn to fear him. The remaining creatures didn't attack. Instead, they slowly retreated back into the maze of corridors, their clicks and hisses fading into the darkness. Alex stood amidst the carnage, adrenaline and pain coursing through him in equal measure. He was battered, broken, and likely dying, but he had defied the odds. He had survived. Now came the daunting task of making sense of this situation. He stumbled through the vessel following the tracks of the skeletal things. They had technology, tools, and some semblance of structure. There had to be answers here. His head throbbed, exhaustion threatening to drag him into oblivion once again. Finally, he found their command center. Unlike the chaotic squalor elsewhere on the ship, here there was a chilling sense of order. Consoles flickered with alien script he couldn't decipher, and holographic projections mapped constellations he didn't recognize. But it was the central display that drew his eye, a crudely rendered image of Earth. A jolt of cold realization washed over him. These creatures, they weren't native to this feral planet. They were invaders just as he was. The thought of what they had planned for his homeworld filled him with renewed strength. No matter the cost, he had to find a way to warn his people. Alex began exploring the consoles, his fingers clumsily tracing over unidentifiable controls. A flicker of movement activated a side screen. Security logs? Pictorial, thankfully, and gruesomely clear. And there, at the center of it all, a massive hive-like chamber pulsing with grotesque fleshy tendrils. Something monstrous was stirring within the depths of this ruined vessel. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He wasn't fighting individual creatures. This was a war on a horrifying, unthinkable scale. And he, a single ranger with a broken body and a dwindling will to live, might be the only thing standing against the tide of a cosmic horror. The weight of the realization nearly buckled his knees. But something deep within him, a primal instinct forged in the fiery crucible of survival, refused to surrender. Alex gripped his blade until his knuckles turned white. He was a beast more savage than man. If these monsters wanted a war, he'd give them hell. Days blurred into weeks. Alex survived inside the wreckage. He salvaged what food and medical supplies he could, turning the consoles and control panels of the command center into a makeshift headquarters. He rested where he could, slept with his combat knife clenched in his fist, ever alert for the return of the skeletal horde. Pain became his constant companion. His injuries, festering and poorly treated, pulsed with a fiery beat in time to his fevered heart. But beneath the agony, he grew stronger in a different way. He studied the alien technology, the star charts, and the crude anatomical records. Knowledge was his new weapon. He hunted, at first clumsily, driven by hunger and necessity. Later, it evolved into grim strategy. The planet's deadly ecosystem became his brutal training ground. He learned to track the creatures, anticipate their movements, and turn their terrifying adaptations against them. The hunted was becoming the hunter. And always, the monstrous presence pulsed at the heart of the crashed vessel, a constant thrum vibrating under his skin. Alex knew the time for preparation was running thin. Whatever these creatures had planned, it would soon be unleashed upon this unsuspecting world. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to strike. One night, under the cover of torrential rain, Alex moved. The skeletal creatures were less vigilant in the downpour. He used their diminished senses against them, ghosts in the shadows striking with deadly precision. Each kill brought him closer to the throbbing, pulsating hive chamber. Finally, he stood before its glistening membrane, a barrier between him and the unspeakable horror within. The stench of decay was overwhelming. Alex readied the last of his scavenged explosives, a crude, desperate solution, but it was all he had. With a final roar, he charged, tossing the explosive bundle into the heart of the hive. The detonation was deafening, a burst of blinding light and searing heat. The shockwaves sent him sprawling, and then came the screams, thousands of them rising and falling in a cacophony of pain and fury. Alex scrambled away, the sounds of the collapsing hive a symphony of destruction echoing behind him. Limping and bloodied, he reached the edge of the ruined vessel. Dawn was breaking, casting the alien landscape in an eerie, blood-red glow. Survival, for now, had been achieved, but in its wake a grim truth dawned. This was his world now, this planet, this war, it was his forever. Years turned into a decade. The crashed alien vessel was no longer just a refuge, but the foundation of a rough-hewn outpost. Alex had salvaged what he could, jury-rigged defenses, and cobbled together a semblance of functionality from the skeletal remains of alien technology. His home wasn't pretty, but it was defensible. Survival had become a way of life. The creatures, the ones who survived the destruction of their hive, roamed the wilderness, fragmented and leaderless. Alex never stopped hunting them. Some days it was a necessity. They were as persistent as the brutal ecosystem that birthed them. Other days it was a grim sport. With each kill, he honored his fallen crew and reaffirmed his dominance over this hostile world. But he wasn't alone anymore. At first in whispers, then in desperate pleas carried by the wind, others had found their way to his hidden outpost. Survivors, crash-landed colonists, scouts from outposts on the fringes that had fallen eerily silent, even lone soldiers hailing from expeditions he'd never heard of. Ragtag and battle-scarred, their arrival was always the same. First disbelief, followed by relief, then the burning question in their haunted eyes, "How long have you been here?" Alex, hardened by the solitary survival, became an unwilling leader. He taught them what he had learned, how to fight, how to hunt, and crucially, how to make this savage world bend to their will. The outposts, under his grim guidance, transformed. Watchtowers rose, fields were cleared, guarded, harvested. They forged a wary society, not out of idealism, but out of the cold, sharp truth. Alone, they stood no chance. The transmissions he cobbled together were rudimentary, desperate cries in the cosmic darkness. Most went unanswered, but once, just once, a faint response crackled through the static. It wasn't a rescue, just acknowledgement, and a chilling warning. Earth knew. The war was far bigger than this blood-soaked planet. Alex stood atop his crude watchtower, scanning the horizon, his pulse rifle a familiar weight in his hands. The world had tried to consume him, break him. It had failed. The transformation was complete. No longer a lone ranger, he was the pack leader, his people an extension of his will to survive. They called him the Hellwalker, whispered his name like a prayer. It fit. The sun dipped below the jagged mountains, painting the sky in streaks of crimson. The distant roar of a predator echoed in the growing twilight. Tomorrow it would be hunted. Tomorrow there would be another fight, another day carved from the jaws of a monstrous world. Alex was ready. He was finally home.
In the heart of the Krellian Empire, nestled among the swirling nebulas and starlit backdrops of the Zentara galaxy, lay the Grand Library of Krell. It was a monument to knowledge, a beacon of history and culture for a race that prided itself on its intellectual supremacy. Among its vast halls and endless rows of data archives wandered Xylix, a young Krellian historian with a curious mind and an insatiable thirst for the unknown. Xylix's bright blue skin shimmered under the soft ambient light of the library, his large expressive eyes scanning the holographic displays that floated around him. His elongated fingers, characteristic of his species, danced over the interactive panels, sifting through centuries of interstellar history. He was searching for something that had puzzled scholars for generations, the reason behind the Krellian Empire's long-standing non-aggression pact with humanity. Krellians, a race of superior technological prowess and strategic intellect, had conquered numerous star systems, establishing a vast and unchallenged dominion. Yet they had always avoided direct conflict with humans, a relatively young species in the cosmic arena. This unusual restraint intrigued Xylix, driving him to delve into the depths of the Grand Library's archives. His search led him to ancient battle logs, diplomatic exchanges, and cultural studies. He discovered accounts of humans' resilience in the face of adversity, their ability to thrive in the most inhospitable environments, and their uncanny knack for innovation. But these traits, impressive as they were, didn't fully explain the Krellians' cautious stance. One day, while immersed in his research, Xylix stumbled upon a forgotten section of the library. Here, he found a series of personal memoirs and interviews from Krellian veterans who had encountered humans in various skirmishes and diplomatic missions. Their stories painted a different picture of humanity, one that textbooks and official records seldom mentioned. Xylix read about the Battle of Orion's Belt, where a human fleet, vastly outnumbered, had outmaneuvered and outsmarted a superior Krellian armada through unconventional warfare tactics. He learned of the Siege of Terra, where humans facing imminent destruction had united disparate nations in an unprecedented show of solidarity and resilience, turning the tide against an overwhelming enemy. But it was not just their combat prowess that caught Xylix's attention. He was moved by accounts of human empathy and compassion, even towards their enemies. There were stories of human medics treating wounded Krellian soldiers, of human commanders negotiating ceasefires to prevent unnecessary bloodshed, and of human colonies offering aid to Krellian refugees during a galactic crisis. These revelations shed new light on the Krellians' decision to avoid direct confrontation with humanity. It wasn't just fear of their military might, it was a deep-seated respect, and perhaps even fear, of their unpredictable nature and their capacity for both war and peace. Xylix's perspective on humanity and his own race's history began to shift. He realized that the Krellians had much to learn from humans, not just about warfare, but about empathy, unity, and the strength that comes from diversity. His research was turning into more than just a quest for answers. It was becoming a journey of personal growth and understanding. As he delved deeper into the archives, Xylix began to piece together a narrative that would challenge the very foundations of Krellian beliefs about humans and themselves. He was on the brink of a profound discovery, one that could reshape the future of Krellian and human relations forever. But this path of discovery was not without its dangers. Unbeknownst to Xylix, his research was drawing attention from certain quarters within the Krellian hierarchy, who preferred the past to remain buried. Xylix's research soon led him to a clandestine meeting with the Krellian High Council, a group of the oldest and most influential members of Krellian society. The meeting took place in a dimly lit chamber, deep within a space station orbiting Krell, the Empire's capital planet. The chamber, adorned with ancient artifacts and advanced technology, reflected the dichotomy of Krellian culture, a blend of deep-rooted tradition and cutting-edge innovation. The elders, draped in ornate ceremonial robes, listened with a mix of skepticism and concern as Xylix presented his findings. The young historian stood before them, a solitary figure against the backdrop of history, as he passionately recounted the tales of human valor, empathy, and unity that he had uncovered. He brought these stories to life through a holographic display, showcasing pivotal moments where humans had demonstrated extraordinary qualities. Xylix argued that the Krellians' avoidance of war with humans was not out of fear, but out of respect and a subtle acknowledgement of humans' unpredictable nature. He pointed out that throughout galactic history, when other species had underestimated humans, it had often led to surprising outcomes. He emphasized that the Krellians had wisely chosen to coexist with humans rather than attempt to dominate them, recognizing the potential for a mutually beneficial relationship. The elders, however, were not easily swayed. They questioned Xylix's interpretations, challenging the idea that humans could be anything more than a tactical nuisance. They warned Xylix of the dangers of romanticizing a species known for its volatility and warned him against further pursuing this line of inquiry. Despite their warnings, Xylix felt a deep conviction that his discoveries held the key to a greater understanding between Krellians and humans. He believed that by learning from humans' strengths and their unique approach to life and conflict, the Krellians could evolve beyond their current state, which was mired in arrogance and a false sense of superiority. Determined to continue his quest, Xylix sought out more direct sources of information. He embarked on a daring journey to the frontiers of Krellian space, where Krellian and human territories met. Here, he planned to interview veterans and eyewitnesses of past human-Krellian encounters, hoping to gain first-hand accounts that would bolster his theories. His journey was fraught with risks. The border regions were volatile, with frequent skirmishes and a deep-seated mistrust between the two species. But Xylix's desire for truth drove him forward, pushing him into the murky waters of galactic politics and interspecies relations. As he travelled, Xylix encountered a myriad of perspectives. He met Krellian soldiers who spoke of humans with a grudging respect, recalling instances where human ingenuity had turned the tables in battles they thought they had won. He heard stories from traders who marvelled at the humans' ability to adapt and thrive in environments that would have been hostile or even lethal to other species. But it was his encounters with humans that truly opened his eyes. He met human diplomats, scientists, and ordinary citizens, each contributing pieces to the complex puzzle of humanity. Through these interactions, Xylix began to see humans not as a monolithic entity, but as a diverse and dynamic species, capable of great kindness and devastating wrath. As Xylix delved deeper into the border regions, he uncovered a startling truth, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the Krellians' relationship with humans. He realized that the story was far more intricate and interwoven than he had ever imagined, hinting at a secret that could reshape the future of both species. Unbeknownst to Xylix, his quest was drawing the attention of powerful forces within the Krellian Empire, forces that would stop at nothing to keep the past buried. Xylix's journey brought him to a remote human colony, a place where the lines between Krellian and human territories blurred. It was here, under a star-filled sky, amidst a landscape dotted with a fusion of human and alien architecture, that Xylix made a groundbreaking discovery. In an ancient, forgotten part of the colony, Xylix uncovered a hidden Krellian artifact. The artifact, an enigmatic device glowing with an eerie light, was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was adorned with inscriptions in both Krellian and an old human language. The discovery sent a wave of shock and intrigue through Xylix. The existence of such an artifact, bearing both Krellian and human elements, suggested a shared history far deeper and more complex than anyone had imagined. As Xylix studied the artifact, he began to unravel its secrets. The inscriptions spoke of a time long forgotten, a time when Krellians and humans had not just interacted, but had worked together. They told a story of a joint expedition undertaken by both species to explore the mysteries of the galaxy. This collaborative effort had led to the creation of the artifact, a symbol of unity and mutual respect. This revelation was monumental. It suggested that the non-aggression pact between Krellians and humans was not born out of fear or strategic avoidance, but out of a deep-seated bond, forged in the crucible of exploration and discovery. The Krellians' ancestors had recognized the potential in humans, not just as warriors, but as partners in the quest for knowledge and understanding. Xylix knew that this discovery could change everything. It had the power to bridge the gap between Krellians and humans, to transform their relationship from one of cautious coexistence to one of cooperation and perhaps even friendship. But as Xylix prepared to bring this information to the public, he realized that there were those within the Krellian Empire who would do anything to suppress it. These forces, fearful of losing their grip on power and wary of change, viewed Xylix's discovery as a threat to the established order. Undeterred, Xylix worked tirelessly, documenting his findings and preparing to present them to the High Council and the wider galaxy. He knew the risks involved. He knew that he was challenging centuries of beliefs and policies. But he also knew that the truth had the power to reshape the future, to usher in a new era of understanding and collaboration between Krellians and humans. As Xylix stood before the High Council, the weight of history upon his shoulders, he presented his findings with a mix of passion and solemnity. He spoke of the artifact, of the shared history, and of the potential for a brighter future. The Council listened, their expressions a mixture of surprise, skepticism, and in some cases, fear. The revelation sparked a galaxy-wide debate. Many Krellians were moved by the discovery, seeing it as an opportunity to forge a new path. Others, steeped in tradition and suspicion, resisted the idea of changing their stance towards humans. But the truth, once revealed, could not be ignored. Slowly, the dynamics between Krellians and humans began to change. Diplomatic missions increased, cultural exchanges began, and joint ventures in science and exploration were planned. Xylix, once a lone historian in search of answers, had become a catalyst for change. His discovery had not only illuminated the past, but had also lit the way for the future. A future where Krellians and humans could learn from each other, work together, and perhaps, in time, even understand each other. In the end, Xylix realized that his journey had been about more than just uncovering the past. It had been about paving the way for a future where the phrase, "Why we don't fight the humans," was not a question of fear or strategy, but a statement of respect, partnership, and hope. Captain Lyra of the Zorquian fleet stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Silent Prowler. Her eyes, reflecting the cold light of the holographic displays, scanned the blue and green planet below. Earth, a primitive world by Zorquian standards, seemed an easy target for their expansion, but as the first wave of their invasion began, a startling realization dawned upon the Zorquians. They had gravely underestimated humanity. On the ground, the Earth's forces, led by a young military strategist named Alex, mounted a defense unlike any the Zorquians had witnessed. The humans were not as technologically advanced, but their ingenuity and adaptability were astonishing. In the skies, human fighter jets, outdated compared to the sleek Zorquian spacecraft, weaved through the barrage of alien laser fire. On the ground, soldiers in makeshift armor repurposed alien technology, turning the invaders' advantages against them. Lyra, observing the chaos, felt a twinge of respect for these resilient beings. She had been trained to view any non-Zorquian life as inferior, yet here she was, witnessing a species fighting with a ferocity driven by something more profound than mere survival. As the battle raged, a sudden explosion rocked the Silent Prowler. In a daring move, the humans had launched a counterattack, targeting the Zorquian mothership. Alarms blared, and Lyra struggled to maintain her composure. She issued orders to retreat, but it was too late. The ship shuddered violently, descending towards Earth. Lyra awoke to the sound of human voices. She was in a makeshift prison, her once imposing figure now confined in a small, dimly lit room. Her captors, wary yet curious, observed her. Among them was Alex, whose reputation had reached even the ears of the Zorquians. Alex approached her cell with a mix of caution and intrigue. "Captain Lyra," he said, his voice steady but not unkind, "you've given us quite a fight, but now we have questions, and we hope you have answers." Lyra, despite her situation, felt a surge of admiration for Alex's directness. His strategy had been instrumental in her capture, a strategy born not of advanced technology, but of human wit and bravery. In the days that followed, Lyra and Alex engaged in long conversations. She learned of Earth's history, its wars, its triumphs, and its setbacks. She was struck by the intensity of human emotions, their capacity for both great kindness and devastating cruelty. Alex, in turn, was fascinated by Lyra's descriptions of Zorquian society. a civilization that had eliminated war among its own kind, yet unhesitatingly waged it against others. As they talked, a grudging respect formed between the alien commander and the human strategist. Meanwhile, outside the confines of the prison, the war continued. The Zorquians, having lost their flagship and leader, were thrown into disarray. Humanity seized the opportunity, pushing back the invaders with renewed vigour. Lyra heard of these developments through the guarded whispers of her captors and saw it in their eyes, a fierce determination to protect their world. But as the days turned to weeks, the dynamics of the war began to change. The Zorquians, realizing the cost of their underestimation, started to retreat. Earth, battered but unbroken, celebrated their hard-won victory. Yet in the aftermath of the conflict, a new challenge arose. The world had been forever changed by the encounter with an alien race. Old conflicts among human nations paled in comparison to the threat they had faced together. A sense of unity, fragile but real, began to emerge. Lyra watched these developments with a mix of sorrow and hope. Her world was in ruins, but perhaps in its place something new could grow, something born of mutual respect and understanding between two vastly different species. In the makeshift prison room, the conversations between Captain Lyra and Alex evolved from cautious exchanges to discussions of deeper significance. Lyra, once a proud commander, now found herself re-evaluating her beliefs and the motives of her people. Alex, driven by a desire to understand the Zorquians, asked Lyra about her home world. She spoke of Zork, a planet of breathtaking beauty and harmony, where conflict among its inhabitants was a thing of the past. Their society was built on collective knowledge and a shared goal of advancement, yet this pursuit had led them to a path of expansion and conquest, viewing other species as mere obstacles in their grand scheme. As Lyra shared these insights, Alex began to see the parallels between the Zorquians' past and humanity's own turbulent history. He spoke of Earth's struggles, the wars that had ravaged the planet, and the slow, painful journey towards peace. These stories resonated with Lyra, who had never considered the possibility of similarities between her kind and the humans. Their dialogues were interrupted by news of the ongoing conflict. The Zorquians, demoralized by the loss of their leader and flagship, were withdrawing from Earth. However, they left destruction in their wake, targeting major cities and military bases in a final act of defiance. The devastation prompted a global response. Nations that had once been at odds united against the common enemy, forging alliances that would have been unimaginable before the invasion. This newfound unity was not lost on Lyra, who saw a reflection of her own people's past unity in the face of external threats. Amidst this chaos, a daring plan was conceived by the human leaders, with Alex at the forefront. They would use the captured Zorquian technology, combined with their own, to launch a counter-offensive, targeting the retreating Zorquian fleet to prevent further attacks. Lyra, torn between her loyalty to her people and the respect she had developed for humanity, found herself at a crossroads. She could provide valuable insight into the Zorquian technology, potentially turning the tide in favor of Earth, but doing so would mean betraying her species. Alex, sensing her turmoil, offered her a choice. "Help us, and you help end this conflict," he said, "not as a Zorquian or a human, but as someone who wants to see an end to needless destruction." Moved by his words, Lyra made her decision. She provided the humans with critical information about the Zorquian fleet's weaknesses, knowing that this act would change the course of the war and her life forever. The counter-offensive was a success. With Lyra's help, the human forces managed to inflict significant damage on the Zorquian fleet, forcing them into a full retreat. Earth had not only defended itself, but had also sent a clear message to the invaders. In the aftermath, as the world began to rebuild, Lyra was given a choice. She could return to her people, who were now wary of further conflict, or stay on Earth, where her knowledge and experience could aid in the healing process. After much contemplation, she chose to stay, becoming an ambassador between her kind and humanity. Her decision marked the beginning of a new era. The war had ended, but the journey towards understanding and cooperation had just begun. Lyra and Alex continued their discussions, which now included plans for peaceful coexistence and mutual development. The exchange of ideas and technology promised a brighter future for both species. As the first ambassador of her kind on Earth, Lyra worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the Zorquians and humans. Her efforts, supported by Alex and other like-minded individuals, laid the foundation for a new alliance, one that would ensure that the horrors of the war would never be repeated. Through her eyes, both Zorkians and humans learned to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow beings with shared hopes, dreams, and a desire for a peaceful existence in the vast universe. The discussions that unfolded were groundbreaking. Earth and Zork, once adversaries, were now exploring avenues of cooperation. The Zorkians, impressed by humanity's resilience and ingenuity, were eager to share their advanced technology and knowledge. In return, humans offered insights into their rich cultural diversity and experiences in overcoming internal conflicts. Lyra, addressing the assembly, spoke of the lessons learned from the war. "We came to Earth as conquerors, blinded by our own perceived superiority," she said, "but we leave as partners, humbled and enriched by the strength and spirit of humanity." Alex, too, shared his thoughts. "This war taught us the value of unity and the dangers of underestimating others. Now we have a chance to build something greater, a coalition based on mutual respect and shared goals." The talks resulted in the formation of the Earth-Zork Alliance, a coalition dedicated to peaceful exploration, cultural exchange and joint technological development. The alliance was a testament to the idea that even the most unlikely of friendships could arise from the ashes of conflict. As part of the alliance, a cultural exchange program was initiated. Zorkians visited Earth to learn about human society, while humans travelled to Zork to experience the wonders of the alien world. These exchanges deepened the understanding between the two species, breaking down barriers of mistrust and prejudice. Lyra, now an ambassador, played a crucial role in these exchanges. She guided Zorkian visitors through Earth's cities, introducing them to human art, music and cuisine. She watched with satisfaction as her fellow Zorkians experienced the same transformation she had, their initial apprehension giving way to admiration and respect. On Zork, Alex led delegations of human scientists and diplomats, marvelling at the advanced Zorkian technology and their harmonious society. The knowledge and ideas exchanged during these visits sparked innovations that benefited both worlds. The Earth-Zork Alliance soon became a beacon of hope in the galaxy. Other civilizations, inspired by the Alliance, sought to join or emulate its model of cooperation. The Alliance, once a bilateral effort, grew into a galactic council, fostering peace and collaboration among multiple species. As years passed, the scars of the war faded, replaced by a shared prosperity. The Alliance's achievements were numerous, from joint space exploration missions to breakthroughs in medicine and energy. But perhaps its greatest triumph was the enduring friendship between Earth and Zork, two worlds that had once known only conflict. Lyra, looking out over the skyline, reflected on her journey. From a commander intent on conquest to an ambassador of peace, her transformation mirrored that of her people and of humanity. Together, they had overcome the darkness of war, forging a future bright with possibility. In this new era of interstellar cooperation, the Earth-Zork Alliance stood as a testament to the power of understanding and the unbreakable spirit of two worlds that had dared to find common ground. As the sun set on the gleaming city, casting long shadows across the conference room, Lyra and Alex exchanged a knowing look. They had been instrumental in changing the course of history, not through force or intimidation, but through empathy, dialogue, and the unwavering belief in the potential for good in all beings. The end of the war was not just a victory for Earth or Zork, but a victory for the galaxy. It was a triumph of hope, a celebration of diversity, and most importantly, a recognition of the boundless possibilities when worlds unite in the pursuit of a shared future. And so, the story of the Earth-Zork Alliance, born from the ashes of misunderstanding and conflict, became a beacon across the stars, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of cooperation, understanding and humanity can shine through. The ultimatum reverberated through the command hub, its weight bearing down like a collapsing star. Admiral Jacobs, hardened veteran of a dozen stellar skirmishes, felt an unfamiliar unease ripple through him. The transmission was chillingly simple. The Axion Confederation had arrived, claiming dominance over the Sol system in accordance with their sacred doctrine of celestial might. This wasn't merely an invasion, it was a prelude to interstellar humiliation. Earth had a choice, compliance or annihilation, but their terms weren't about simple subjugation. The Axian demand bordered on the absurd. They'd spare Earth if its greatest warrior fought not as a soldier, but as a gladiator within their barbaric intergalactic arena. Jacobs watched images of the Axian vessels fill the tactical feed, monstrous fossilized leviathans that dwarfed humanity's most advanced destroyers. It was a hopeless mismatch, a technological gulf spanning centuries. Yet humanity had never bowed to overwhelming odds. The question hanging in the command hub wasn't if they would resist, but who would carry the impossible burden. Desperation washed over Jacobs as the Axian deadline ticked down. No tactical doctrine, no contingency plan existed for this scenario. Panic seized the world, yet beneath the rising chaos, Jacobs found a sliver of chilling clarity. Only one human on this entire planet defied every military assessment, every algorithm predicting survival. It wasn't about raw strength, technological advantage, or tactical genius. This was about a will honed by a lifetime of living and fighting in the shadows. There was no soft way to deliver this. Captain Alexei Dimitrov. Jacobs rasped the name into the secured comlink. I need you back on active duty. He braced himself for fury, for rejection. Instead, the response arrived, flat and heavy like weathered steel. Admiral, with all due respect, I think you've got the wrong number. Believe me, Captain, there's no mistake, Jacobs countered, the strain evident in his voice. Your name doesn't ring any bells on official channels these days, for all the right reasons. But desperate times. He let the sentence trail off, a silent acknowledgement of the life Dimitrov had abandoned. A pause crackled like static on the line, Dimitrov wrestling with the ghost of his past. Finally a sigh hissed through the comms. Fine, where and when, Admiral? There was no mistaking the weariness in his voice, the quiet acceptance of a duty that should have passed him by. When the transmission ended, Jacob's unease only doubled. Dimitrov's file read like a fever dream. Deep infiltration specialist, wet work legend from the forgotten border wars, officially listed as retired 10 years ago, location unknown. But Jacobs knew exactly where to find him, the same backwater moon where they buried most of their failed Black Ops experiments. This fight wasn't some galactic spectacle Dimitrov was built for, it was the brutal opposite. A desperate gamble on a broken soldier the Axian wouldn't so much as register as a threat. The absurdity of Earth's chosen champion felt darkly poetic. Dimitrov hadn't changed much since those last grainy surveillance feeds, weathered like old granite, a tangle of scars snaking across his olive skin, his eyes hollowed and shadowed with ghosts only he could see. This wasn't a warrior returning to glory, but a man walking from his own makeshift grave straight into hell. But if anyone had a sliver of a chance of turning this suicide mission into an act of defiance, it was him. Admiral? Dimitrov nodded, his voice a rough-hewn rasp. You sure as hell know how to ruin a man's day. A bitter chuckle rolled from Jacobs. It gets worse, Captain. He motioned to the tactical feed, the monstrous silhouettes of Axian ships a constant reminder of what they faced. Earth expects a hero, and all we have left is you. Dimitrov's lips curled in a humourless smirk, but an edge of something hard flickered in his eyes. It wasn't quite hope, maybe something closer to the primal grit of a cornered animal. This, Jacobs realized, was as good as it could get. No need for the pep talk, Admiral, Dimitrov cut in. I understand my odds. This ain't an arena battle, not in the way those aliens understand it. No rules, no glory, just one brutal question. Can I kill 'em before they kill me? Jacobs didn't flinch from the stark assessment. That's exactly it, Captain. Let's get this over with then, Dimitrov grumbled, stepping towards the waiting shuttle. The sooner I do my little space dance, the sooner I can crawl back into that hole you dragged me out of. The journey to the Axian flagship hanging in orbit, like a predatory leviathan, was unnaturally quiet. Jacobs was tense, every instinct screaming against this madness. But looking at Dimitrov, it was a different story. The old soldier seemed oddly at peace, the years of haunted restlessness sloughed away, replaced by a predatory focus Jacobs hadn't seen in ages. The Axian had called for a duel of champions, and in some twisted way Earth had sent them just that, not a hero, but something primal. A weapon born in the furnace of the forgotten wars, an echo of humanity's will to survive. Aboard the gargantuan Axian command deck all was spectacle and scorn. Towering reptilian creatures in baroque armour sneered down at Dimitrov. Axion champions, Jacobs gathered, warriors culled from conquered worlds, hardened survivors of countless arenas. This wasn't just a duel, it was a calculated spectacle, the final show of subjugation designed to crush all hope of defiance. Dimitrov was an insect under a magnifying glass, nothing more. A translator squawked a challenge, a demand for submission and acceptance of Earth's defeat. Dimitrov's response was a low, humourless snarl. "I might be Earth's best," he muttered towards the translator, "but I sure as hell ain't here to give a damn about honour." A predatory, disconcerted hush fell over the Axion deck. In their cosmic hubris, they simply couldn't compute a warrior without pride or reverence for ritual. Their mistake. This wasn't a gladiator stepping into the spotlight, but a wild animal loosed. The arena materialized, not some coliseum filled with roaring crowds, but a utilitarian kill zone shimmered into existence via energy fields and hard light projectors. This was an efficient execution. The first opponent teleported across from Dimitrov, a lumbering brute of a Xeno, scaled obsidian armor plating crackling with barely contained power. The creature bellowed a war cry, the translator garbling the meaning, but the intent was clear. Raw intimidation. Dimitrov didn't so much as twitch. He circled the monstrous Xeno, weathered combat boots barely disturbing the pristine arena floor. The translator whirred again, mocking his caution as cowardice. This too was part of the Axion ritual, the psychological dismantling of hope. "Afraid, little mammal?" the creature rasped, a smirk rippling its reptilian jaw. Then, as if a switch had been thrown, Dimitrov moved. The blur of his attack didn't register until the scaled giant staggered, an unnatural wet gurgle emerging from its maw. A thin crimson line spread across its breastplate, then burst open, spilling viscera onto the gleaming surface. Dimitrov stood beside the collapsing foe, holding what wasn't a blade, but a crude shard of metal scavenged off the shuttle during the flight. In the silent awe following the kill, he surveyed the stunned Axion crowd. "Tell your bosses," he uttered into the translator, "Earth doesn't play by your rules." Raw panic replaced the Axion arrogance. Their orchestrated ritual was shattered. One dead champion wouldn't break their galactic empire, but the swift, efficient brutality displayed by an unknown, seemingly harmless insect sent tremors of uncertainty through their ranks. Earth hadn't sent a knight, it had sent an assassin. Word of Dimitrov's bloody triumph rippled through Earth's forces faster than any official broadcast. In the bleakness of an unwinnable war, a monstrous defiance sparked, a glimmer of possibility, not of defeating the Axion, but of bloodying them as they fell. It was a brutal kind of hope, tinged with the desperation of a species with its back against the wall, but it was hope nonetheless. And within the killing field of the arena, something shifted in Dimitrov too. This wasn't a return to glory, but a descent into an older, fiercer instinct. An echo of the man he had been hardened in Earth's forgotten shadows, not a hero, but the monster humanity needed to survive. The Axion responded not with honour, but with desperate urgency. The next challenger wasn't a brutish champion, but a slithering bio-horror, blades erupting from beneath translucent flesh, poison dripping from iridescent barbs. If the first bout was meant to overwhelm, this was designed to inflict a slow, agonizing demise. But Dimitrov saw only opportunity. Unlike the arrogant behemoth, this monstrous assassin relied on its twisted physiology, and that meant vulnerabilities. His every movement seemed slow, calculated. The dance began, not a duel but a hunt. Dimitrov's old scars throbbed in symphony with the alien's dripping poison. This wasn't about strength, but cunning. His scrappy combat style, honed in 100 clandestine brawls on forgotten outposts, became an asset. Every swipe, each lunge of the nightmarish creature left it unbalanced, exposing fragile joints. His own ragged gasp seemed less desperation, and more an invitation for overextension. Then the moment came. The alien twisted in an impossible lunge, blades glistening. Instead of dodging, Dimitrov stepped in, weathered hand slamming into a pressure point hidden under the armoured carapace. The beast went rigid, nerve clusters overloading, an unnatural squeal of death piercing the silence. He didn't stop, tearing a shard of bio-armour from the corpse, a gruesome trophy, a tool, a message. His breathing still rough, he circled the corpse, facing the now shaken Axion commanders. "Lesson 2, he coughed. "Never underestimate the desperation of hunted prey." Earth watched in breathless horror. Their hope curdled into something more savage, a desperate echoing of Dimitrov's defiance. In his bloody victories they saw a twisted victory of their own. If humanity were to go down, it would go down swinging, teeth bared against insurmountable odds. In the Axion command deck, their ritual shattered, a creeping horror was setting in. There was no glory in crushing insects, just mounting uncertainty, and the fear of something lurking beneath the calm acceptance of defeat, a species-wide determination that transcended individual life, a primal survival instinct they, with their empires and rituals, had long forgotten. Dimitrov couldn't keep this pace forever. Each win took its toll. An old shrapnel wound pulsed beneath his ribs. A burn across his back throbbed, reopened in a spray of crimson every time he moved. It didn't help that the Axion were no fools. They switched tactics, isolating him in shifting mazes of force fields, bombarding him with projectiles from afar. It was during the fifth or sixth fight, time bled together in the haze of pain, that Dimitrov first caught sight of it. A shimmering in the crowd of towering Axion spectators, a figure somehow distinct from the armoured ranks, cloaked and hooded, an observer detached from the brutal spectacle. This being emanated intelligence, the cool precision of a true adversary. A surge of old instincts jolted him back into combat. The Axion had thrown some four-limbed bioweapon his way, fast and erratic. Its attacks were mere annoyances, painful jabs that wore him down but lacked any killing blow. It was bait. They knew the real fight wasn't about this duel anymore. Dimitrov's survival now mattered less than his utter exhaustion. In a blur of motion he feigned weakness, an exaggerated stumble that turned into a lunge. The bioweapon was overconfident, closing in for the kill. Dimitrov used its own momentum, flipping it over his shoulder and shattering its spine against a force field. Silence descended. But Dimitrov's eyes never left the cloaked figure in the stands. They'd underestimated him, and now they were adapting. His respite was over. A wave of his bloodied hand cut the translator's squawk short. "Next!" he snarled, voice crackling from exertion. "But don't send anything less than your best. I might be broken down, but the fun's just getting started." His bluff might not work twice, but he had to buy time, to figure out his new opponent, the hidden strategist that held the key to Earth's fate as tightly as his own death warrant. The duel had become a desperate chess game, played out across the bloodied sands of the arena. He wasn't fighting for Earth's existence anymore, but for its sliver of hope. The spark of defiance he'd unwillingly ignited. They didn't disappoint. The next challenger wasn't a bestial gladiator, but an armoured automaton, humming with contained energy, wielding weaponry the translator struggled to define. This wasn't meant to overwhelm nor to outlast. It was a puzzle, a killing machine specifically designed to counter Dimitrov's chaotic combat style. The cloaked figure's strategy crystallized. They sought not merely to kill him, but to dismantle him, to analyze the reason behind Earth's unexpected tenacity. He was no longer an opponent, but a specimen to be dissected. In the face of this cold efficiency, Dimitrov felt something approaching admiration, mixed with the dread pooling in his gut. He'd faced death countless times, but never with this calculated detachment. Against the hulking champions he had exploited pride, against the assassins, their physiological weaknesses. But the machine had neither to exploit, just pure lethality programmed into its core. The automaton surged forward, each pulse of its weapon system unleashing blasts Dimitrov barely dodged. They weren't aiming to kill but to wound, to cripple, to force him into a reactive fight he couldn't hope to win. The ground around him churned, pockmarked with near misses. Every move he made was predicted, countered. This wasn't warrior against warrior, but soldier against strategist. A war waged not in a ring, but across the circuits of this relentless adversary. He needed a risk, something desperate enough to throw a wrench into the intricate pattern of the automaton's programming. It wasn't his body that would win this, but his broken mind, the fractured instincts forged in decades of clandestine missions. With a ragged scream more animal than human, he broke the machine's rhythm, not with calculated action, but irrational unpredictability. A charge meant to be a dodge, a wound taken to land a desperate, unarmed blow against the reinforced plating. Even as the automaton adjusted, it was thrown off balance for a millisecond, just enough. One strike didn't kill the machine, but it disrupted its core. Wires snarled, sparking, as the automaton thrashed, half-blinded and off-centre. Then the cloaked figure moved, a quick, decisive surge across the arena, hand extended. There was a crackle in the air, then the automaton convulsed and froze, a smoking crater where its chest plate had been. Dimitrov panted, blood and sweat mixing on his battered form, this time Earth's victory had been snatched not by his skill, but by his enemy. The cloaked figure would never let him compromise another one of their creations. It was time to change the rules of the game. Dimitrov knew death was close when the arena shimmered away. One moment he was facing the cloaked adversary, advancing with chilling purpose. The next, he was inside a cell. No longer bathed in the spectacle of combat, the surroundings were starkly illuminated, sterile and surgical. This wasn't where champions fell, but where enemies of empires were broken, and that, he recognized, was what he'd become. Not an annoyance, but a threat to their very order. No snarling translator awaited him here, no ritualized mocking. He was a problem, not a participant. They came quickly, not Axion soldiers, but the cloaked figure, and what could only be described as medical automatons. The figure approached, the hood retracted, finally revealing its scaled but eerily smooth features. "We had hoped to avoid this," the being spoke, its translator buzzing faintly. The sound was less reptilian growl, more of a cool clinical voice. "Your resilience has proved inconvenient." "And a damn shame you won't get your little show." Dimitrov forced a humourless laugh, rattling his bruised ribs. He needed to keep them talking, his body buying time for his desperate mind. "It matters not. Your victories were statistical anomalies, the last gasps of a dying species. But they presented variables," the creature stated, its eyes, unblinking orbs surrounded by scales like burnished silver, gleamed. "This changes the calculus, not in your planet's favour." The medical automatons moved closer. This wasn't treatment, he realized, but vivisection. He thrashed against his makeshift restraints, old pain exploding into blinding new agonies. "Keep dreaming, you overgrown lizard," he rasped, but it was more fear than bravado now. This was the unmasked horror of advanced annihilation, slow, clinical, designed to strip every secret from his body and broadcast those horrors back to Earth. A scaled hand hovered inches from his face, fingers twitching subtly, and a sense of unease settled over Dimitrov. The creature paused, then a strange hiss echoed through the room, something akin to uncertainty. "Your will is aberrant," it said. "It confounds both analysis and prediction." He was running out of time, but in that hesitation Dimitrov glimpsed the ghost of an idea. It wouldn't save his life, and likely wouldn't even save Earth, but it was his final defiance, the bitter sting of a cornered, dying animal. "Your damn machines can figure out my moves," he choked out with bloody exertion. "But what about something not even I can predict?" A chilling ripple passed through the aliens. The cloaked leader hesitated, an uncharacteristic pause breaking its clinical focus. Then, as the automatons began cutting away at his tattered restraints, it gestured at a shimmering panel across the room. His own reflection morphed and warped, twisting out of recognition, as if his image was being fed into some unseen algorithm. His heart sank. Even if he managed to break free, his body was already the blueprint to Earth's demise. They only needed the patterns, the responses, and everything about him was laid bare. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, an old memory echoed within his ravaged mind. He wasn't alone, not fully. His body, his every instinct, had one partner he'd almost forgotten, the scars left behind by Project Nightstar. That disastrous Black Ops initiative had nearly killed him, leaving behind neurological anomalies they swore couldn't survive in real-life combat. The glitches, they had called them, sudden lapses in perception, disjunctions between intent and outcome. They'd made him worthless as a soldier, but just maybe not for this final game. "Go ahead," he forced out between hacking coughs. "See for yourself. It ain't pretty." The image on the screen became grotesque, his features dissolving into static bursts. The creature leaned in, an undercurrent of revulsion mixing with calculated fascination. Then it happened. An involuntary jerk turned into a phantom lunge, his image distorting into impossible postures, his vision fractured, strobing as he fought down the dizzying surge of the old Nightstar malfunction. The aliens didn't pull back in fear, but their hesitation deepened. He tasted blood as he forced the glitches deeper, pushing every fragment of his body and mind beyond their natural borders. The image on screen twisted into an abomination, not mirroring reality, but feeding it the chaos of his malfunctioning nervous system. He couldn't fight this nor control it. He simply was it. A low chittering swept the room, an alarmed chorus from the automatons. With a suddenness that startled both them and him, the glitches stopped. Dimitrov was left drained, sprawled against the restraints, the world bleeding back into coherence. In the room, silence hung heavy. Whatever they'd gleaned from his broken system, it had shocked them. It was their turn to look off balance, their arrogance cracking. Then with a sharp gesture, the leader turned and fled the chamber, automatons scrambling in its wake. For the first time since his arrival, Dimitrov was utterly alone. He might have bought Earth a moment, or condemned them to something far worse. Dimitrov didn't have much time. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind an echoing, terrifying exhaustion. There would be no triumphant last stand, no miraculous escape. His end would be swift and sterile when they returned. But in the bought moments of that chilling solitude, something more potent than fear ignited inside him. His life had been defined by duty, by living at the frayed edges of humanity, its unseen wars fought and lost countless times. Now there was no command, no mission, no cause left, yet the echoes of defiance Earth ignited with his defiance refused to subside. It wasn't pride or even heroism, rather an ember of the raw primal spirit his species refused to surrender. This, he finally understood, was the anomaly the Axion couldn't replicate or counter. Not strength, but the unwavering refusal to die quietly. There was still one move left on the board. When the Axion guards burst in, guns humming with lethal energy, they didn't find a battered prisoner, but a figure standing tall. Every ragged breath defied expectation of submission. They hesitated just long enough. As they surged forward, his weathered palms struck ancient pressure points, not to overpower, but to trigger the final malfunctioning command left behind from Project Nightstar. For the guards, his movements would have been a chaotic blur, impossible to react to before their own nervous systems shorted out in bursts of agonizing electricity. He wasn't fighting, simply triggering the weapon the Axion had left buried within him. In a grotesque ballet, they collapsed while he was left on his knees, blood trickling from his mouth as the glitches ripped through him. No more fights left, no more games to play. Word of his final moments reached back to Earth through the very command circuits the Axion used to break their enemies. Panic twisted into cold resolve. This wasn't an image of failure, but of the terrifying price of survival. This, they began to realize, was the soul of humanity, defiance that transcended logic, hope born out of hopeless sacrifice. And within the heart of the cloaked alien commander, that initial cold certainty shivered. No algorithm could comprehend such an irrational act. Yet the seed of doubt bloomed alongside a cold sense of awe. Humans weren't simply a broken equation. They were chaos embodied, a contagion their galactic empire wasn't equipped to understand, let alone conquer. Perhaps Dimitrov had found an impossible victory after all, not with his life, but in the unyielding spirit of his death. This war had shifted. Humans didn't play to win, they fought to not lose, and perhaps that made all the difference. Far back on Earth, in a bunker so deep even the tremors of orbital bombardments barely registered, Admiral Jacobs received the final transmission. The news spread, first as a low buzz of disbelief, then twisting into a strange mixture of grim pride and cold resolve. Humans couldn't outfly, outgun, or outthink the Axion, but perhaps they could outlast them. The war would take centuries, generations bleeding and sacrificing. Their planet might become an uninhabitable husk, but as long as defiance remained, even a cornered rat could inflict mortal wounds upon giants. They began with an act not of attack, but of broadcasting. Images of Dimitrov were transmitted into the cold depths of space, again and again. The gladiator against monstrous champions, the bloodied figure facing executioners with scorn, the final impossible act of self-destruction. He became a ghost haunting the Axion, not a hero but the spectre of a spirit they lacked. Not of victory, but of the terrible costs of it. Each day, the defiant broadcasts would repeat, etching a reminder onto the enemy's consciousness. In the heart of the Axion fleet, the cloaked commander watched the echoes of Dimitrov's brutal existence play out and felt a deep, unsettling chill spread through its armoured frame. Conquest was measured in calculated moves, but this was an alien form of warfare. Victory didn't just mean claiming their foe's soil, it meant breaking their spirit. Every orbital strike, every crushing battle became hollow when met with an eerie chorus of Dimitrov's defiance. Every fallen human seemed to leave a lingering stain upon the supposed victors. It started quietly, an undercurrent that the Axion commanders refused to admit. Hesitations on the battlefield, a lingering dread replacing cold efficiency. Earth wouldn't surrender, couldn't be broken in the ways they understood. Each act of annihilation only further strengthened something that transcended calculation. In time, their victories began to echo like defeats, and the true costs of their war against a small, dying world with nothing left to lose came into horrifying focus. Centuries might pass, the final outcome unwritten. But even if Earth eventually perished and Alexei Dimitrov's name fell into obscurity, his shadow would remain. From that single seed of defiance, from the raw will to defy even death, humans had ignited a new kind of war, a war that might never be won but might never truly be lost either. They had weaponized an unconquerable force, the soul of a species with its back against the wall. The shriek of Dr. Zerath's proximity alarm tore through the tranquil hum of the lab, her feathered crest puffed up involuntarily, revealing an underlayer of vibrant cobalt feathers, the Zoltani equivalent of human blood rushing to the cheeks. The sensor had identified something, and deep within the bedrock of Katara, anything was unusual. She leaned over the screen, her 4 nimble fingers tapping out a series of inquiries through the translucent membrane. The scans resolved themselves into a series of stark white geometric shapes against the grey matrix of compressed rock. Not natural, artificial. "Call in the excavation team," she crooned to the ambient comm system. "Prioritize structural integrity protocols. Looks like we may have found something significant." In truth, significant was putting it mildly. The structure that slowly surfaced under the meticulous work of the hover drones was an enigma. Its architecture belonged to no known civilization, predating their detailed galactic archives by an order of magnitude. It appeared to be a data vault, and one built to last. Within it lay a crystalline data storage device containing information so densely packed that the initial content estimate indicated centuries of decryption work. Zerath shuddered with a rush of exhilaration. This was bigger than a promotion, bigger than any new species classification. This was her name echoing through scientific journals for millennia to come. A dedicated research station sprouted around the unearthed vault, buzzing with scientists from a dozen civilizations. Months became years, every new breakthrough heralded with bursts of galactic media coverage. Yet the mysteries deepened with each data packet decoded. The language remained unintelligible, though an underlying mathematical foundation offered hope. Species after species threw their greatest minds at it, the lure of ancient, technologically superior knowledge too great to ignore. Then they cracked the Rosetta Stone, not within the language itself, but hidden in a file directory, a subject listing. Amidst astronomical formulas, stellar trajectories, and the schematics for technology they barely imagined, the scientists found a single file header that echoed like a thunderclap through the research station. Subject designation Homo sapiens. Zerath felt a ripple of unease pass through the usually unflappable crowd of scientists. Humans hadn't been spacefaring for more than a handful of centuries, a blink of an eye in galactic timescales. Their technological progress was impressive for a young species, true, but nothing about them had set off alarm bells with any of the established interstellar powers. What could possibly justify a dedicated vault entry? As researchers scrambled over the newly accessible sections of the archive, an eerie picture emerged. Datasets spanned eons of human history, not in the sense of cultural and sociological record-keeping, but of their very biology. It catalogued an ongoing series of genetic anomalies far too statistically unlikely to be considered natural. These weren't the slow, grinding adaptations of natural selection, but precise insertions, deletions, and alterations to their genetic sequences. These changes stretched back further than even the oldest written human languages, further even than the formation of some established modern star nations. Someone, or something, had been altering humanity across its whole course, and then they vanished. There was no sign of who they were, why they interfered, or why they stopped. News leaked with the inevitability of water rushing to fill a crack. Humanity was a tinker toy project. What could they have possibly been altered to do, to become, that warranted such profound intervention? Galactic response was fractured and predictable. Fear, envy, ambition, all swirled in an intoxicatingly dangerous cocktail of reactions. Humans themselves reeled, some taking perverse comfort in the notion of a celestial guiding hand in their affairs, while others raged at the thought of having been mere lab rats for this faceless manipulator. Meanwhile, at subcellular levels across countless human worlds, something flickered awake. Dormant sequences of DNA, the leftovers of that ancient meddling, began to thrum with activity. Reports filtered in, spontaneous physical enhancements, inexplicable bouts of synesthesia, uncanny mental aptitudes. These whispers of ancient design began to rise like a crescendo. This wasn't just about their past. It was about what they might yet become. Xerath had expected political wrangling to ensue, the various stellar blocks to posture and bargain over the revelation. What she hadn't anticipated was the internal combustion among her own people. The Zaltani had lived with unwavering certainty for an age. Theirs was the most advanced knowledge-gathering apparatus in the known galaxy, built over their long history of exploration and meticulous cataloguing. The Vault, humanity's vault, shattered that paradigm. Suddenly, there existed entities older, wiser, and so far ahead that even comprehending their handiwork was akin to an insect attempting calculus. And if such beings shaped humanity, how did that define Xerath's own life trajectory? Was every carefully researched hypothesis she'd ever generated worthless in the grand scheme? It was like discovering there are more dimensions to the universe than previously understood, an unsettling paradigm shift she needed time to adjust to. This existential dissonance fueled the first major schism within her species in recorded history. Those that became known as Vault Heralds fixated on deciphering the remaining records, seeking a tangible roadmap forward. Xerath and her like-minded colleagues, while fascinated, believed they had to chart their own course. To abandon their own scientific methodology, their drive for self-driven discovery, would be tantamount to surrender. These seekers, as they called themselves, became proponents of redoubled efforts in Zaltani-centric research, determined to reclaim their position of scientific preeminence without relying on the technological cast-offs of a vanished elder race. For many years, the Vault lay largely neglected, the promise of ancient secrets outweighed by the threat it represented. Humanity bore the brunt of this shift in galactic relations. Once seen as quirky upstarts, the spectre of their unknown puppet masters hung like a pall over their heads. While some alliances strengthened out of shared uncertainty, others dissolved. Trade became fraught with suspicion. Even internally, humanity splintered. Some factions demanded more aggressive research on their newly awakened gifts, while others lobbied for caution lest they trigger unforeseen consequences or alert whoever, whatever, had manipulated them in the first place. Then, as abruptly as they awoke, the genetic changes went quiescent. The tide of heightened abilities receded, leaving only frustration in its wake. Perhaps a timed switch built into the very fabric of their being, another piece of their existence outside their control. Amidst the turmoil, one human dared to act. Dr. Isabel Martinez was not someone who would typically make the Interstellar news feeds. As a xenolinguist specializing in non-sapient communication patterns, she'd spent decades on far-flung outposts, parsing the clicking courtship melodies of insectoid species and the bioluminescent distress calls of gelatinous deep-sea life. When word of the Vault's discovery and her species' dubious starring role reached her, Martinez did something utterly counterintuitive. She submitted a formal resignation. She was, perhaps politely, asked to reconsider. She flatly refused. A research grant followed from an undisclosed source, suspiciously well-timed. Then a ship, no sleek luxury transport, but an aging bulk freighter with a retrofitted lab. All under the banner of the newly founded Outreach Initiative, a one-person operation seemingly formed on either hubris or sheer madness. Her colleagues whispered the latter, while galactic security forces quietly placed her under surveillance. She had no interest in studying herself, she declared. Humans had spent far too long staring inward since the revelations. What they needed now was to look outward. Thus began Martinez's self-styled mission of reconciliation, by proxy. Travelling to worlds home to newly uncovered minor species, she focused on learning their songs, their dances, their intricate patterns others saw as primitive. To the bemusement of the locals, and sometimes even herself, she'd then offer up what she'd learned, attempting to draw parallels and open channels of communication between beings as seemingly disparate as methane-breathing mollusks and shimmering clouds of sentient spores. Martinez was mocked, occasionally pelted with off-world produce, yet persevered with the stubborn intensity of an academic obsessed. Then, the impossible happened. Her clumsy mirroring of courtship protocols opened a dialogue between two warring aquatic clans. Shared bioindicators she'd picked up elsewhere helped establish a mutually beneficial ecosystem balance between flora and fauna on a fledgling colony world. In success after success, she proved something no one thought possible. With no special gifts, no hidden abilities bequeathed by stellar meddlers, humanity could be exceptional. They could be bridge builders, intermediaries, and problem solvers on a galactic scale. Not warriors, not inheritors of godlike technology, but masters of a far more overlooked power. Genuine connection. The whispers about Dr. Martinez shifted amongst the news feeds. No longer dismissed as a fringe lunatic, there was a new label bandied about: ambassador. Not in any official capacity, that would take decades of glacial intergalactic bureaucracy to even conceptualize. But amongst the species she helped, they knew her name, they signalled it in colours and in sounds that transcended their language. The tide began to turn, ever so slowly. Humans, they realised, had something unique to offer. Not a gift handed down, but one hard-earned through millennia of clawing their way from caves to Stardrive. Xylix heard news of the human amongst her Zaltani colleagues, mostly derisive at first. Seeking acceptance from creatures barely emerged from the primordial swamp. Preposterous. Then came a peculiar shift. In their relentless drive to uncover any vestige of ancient vault-maker knowledge, some amongst the heralds had inadvertently damaged a data packet. Not completely lost, the information contained hints at technology millennia away for any known race, but broken. They turned to the wider scientific community for aid, but even the most brilliant collective minds floundered. Desperation became the mother of humility. An unguarded inquiry found its way to Martinez, not for her genetic peculiarities, but for her reputation as an oddball problem solver. She pored over the damaged data with laser focus, humming softly under her breath as she worked, an old Earth children's tune. Finally, she pointed to a seemingly unrelated section of code. "Look, I'm thinking this needs another point of view. This bit here has some similarities to those Vrixian echolocation nesting patterns I looked at 5 years ago. Maybe you have the tech, but not the right mindset." Incredulity warred with the desperation of the heralds. Yet what other avenues did they have? And so a team of Zaltani researchers made their way to a swampy Vrixian backwater, armed with data files and the willingness to try the bizarre. Weeks stretched into months. Then came the day a crackle of signal announced success. The tech worked. Xylix felt her feathers stir, not with annoyance this time, but with genuine curiosity. Perhaps there was another way. This singular breakthrough proved a bridgehead, not peace, far from it, but a sliver of cooperation born from necessity. Humanity, ever adaptable, carved a niche in this new landscape. Their knack for the unconventional, the untried, made them valuable troubleshooters in ways unimaginable before the Vault discovery. Yet, like the tide, the galactic powers remained restless. The question hanging over every interaction, whispered undercurrents on every diplomatic channel, was not if, but when the architects of humanity would return. It hung over strategic summits and trade negotiations, an existential countdown against the backdrop of interstellar affairs. For some, this unknown threat spurred the largest arms race the galaxy had ever witnessed. To be caught defenseless when the Makers returned meant annihilation or enslavement. Others took a more fatalistic approach, hoarding every scrap of tech they could unearth from the Vault with wild-eyed fervour. Fear of this nebulous other had fractured the peace and balance of power so painstakingly negotiated across centuries. Then came the breakthrough from an unexpected source, not within the Vault, but deep within human biology. Years after the Vault's grand opening, one young human's genetic anomaly turned from curiosity to crisis. He began to hear things, an underlying thrum in the humdrum background of daily existence. At first, dismissed as tinnitus or early psychosis, his auditory perceptions sharpened, not in clarity, but in scope. He heard frequencies of light beyond the visible spectrum. He heard the electromagnetic whine of technology. He heard something else, a rhythmic pattern cutting through the static of existence, faint but growing stronger. It was a signal. Initially kept under wraps by governments and researchers, the whispers leaked. Was humanity a beacon for their makers? An alarm system signalling their evolutionary tinkering had borne fruit. Was this signal a summons or a death knell? What the boy-tuned radio didn't perceive was intent. There was no message, no plea for contact. It was merely an indication of being. And what's more, this signal didn't originate from outside. It came from within the known galaxy itself. Xylix found herself at the nexus of a historic crisis. Her Seeker colleagues argued the signal couldn't be connected to the ancients. There was no mention of anything resembling it in the remaining vault data. Heralds countered that humanity might have triggered something with their newly awakened genetics, awakening a failsafe their creators placed dormant eons ago. Both sides demanded concrete answers she simply couldn't provide, but the Zaltani had the finest sensor arrays, the most powerful computation clusters. Whether she liked it or not, the task of interpreting this bizarre siren song rested with her people. Tracking the signal became the galaxy's singular obsession. Every resource was bent towards pinpointing its origin. What Xyrath's arrays unveiled was a planet shrouded in enigma. No official star charts held mention of it, but it was unmistakably inhabitable. It existed on the very periphery of known space, nestled in a region long dismissed as unremarkable. Yet this world hummed with energy, not like the steady thrum of natural celestial processes, but a chaotic mix of frequencies both ancient and unsettlingly advanced. And at its core thrummed the siren call, emanating from the ground, a beacon broadcasting into the abyss. Fear gave way to a grim urgency. Plans were drafted, task forces organized. If humanity's meddling creators existed on that world, then surely this was where they resided. To ignore it was to court catastrophe, whether an immediate reckoning or a gradual takeover. This wasn't some theoretical maybe of the distant future. This was happening now, on the galaxy's doorstep. An expeditionary force was formed, not in the spirit of discovery that normally propelled a new stellar endeavour, but as a reluctant coalition bracing for confrontation. And as they drew closer, the truth was laid bare on view screens across the vast distances. The world wasn't natural. It was a construct, a vast artificial habitat of impossible scale, masked from afar by meticulously generated electromagnetic fog. Not something built in secrecy, but in plain sight, hidden by grand audacity. No race in recorded history was bold enough, advanced enough, to create something like this, or had reason to hide their magnum opus in such a way. Panic threatened to crack the tenuous veneer of cooperation. Then the signal they followed shifted, abruptly ceasing the outward broadcast. Instead, it refocused onto them, like an electronic gaze falling upon the assembled fleet. Every screen on board flashed with blinding brilliance as a signal flooded their systems, raw code cascading like gibberish upon every interface. Xyrath's breath caught in her throat. They'd been found. It took days to make sense of the downloaded code, not because it was sophisticated, but because it was maddeningly simple. Like teaching a toddler arithmetic and getting back complex physics equations, there was a vast gulf in understanding that baffled every researcher across species. They had the vocabulary, but lacked the grammar of communication, raw elements they had no comprehension of fitting together. Among the chaos, patterns began to resolve. Not coordinates, as originally feared, but sequences, more of the genetic language. It appeared to target specific segments of human DNA, the sequences dormant since their awakening. It was a key, unlocking something their makers placed not into a vault, but inside humanity itself. With mounting dread, a decision was made. Volunteers were carefully chosen from across the spectrum of humanity, young and old, gifted and not, representative of every permutation their altered genome presented. This makeshift crew, burdened with expectations more vast than any space voyage, stepped into specialized capsules aboard the flagship. Each pod was a medical marvel, capable of real-time DNA monitoring and alteration. And at the core, fed by the alien signal, an interface was woven into their nervous system itself, an artificial sensory organ designed to grasp the language of beings seemingly closer to gods than galactic neighbors. One by one they slipped into the abyss of artificially altered consciousness. Outside, the world waited. Xyrath's crest feathers flared with an intensity she'd only felt once before, that first alarm in the lab on Katara. For all their posturing, they were as helpless as insects against a giant's boot. It all boiled down to these fragile creatures, and a language none of them fully understood. Hours became an eternity. Finally, the first one stirred. Not in a dramatic awakening, but with slow, pained blinks. Xyrath rushed to the monitoring station, her voice a brittle hiss. "What? Did you—" She trailed off, unable to voice the enormity of what was at stake. The woman, a researcher barely into her 30s, offered a wan smile. A map, her voice cracked with disuse, and directions for fixing something. A hush fell over the command deck. No one knew what this something could be. A threat lurking just outside of perception. A broken system crucial to existence itself. What emerged in the following days was a tapestry of fragmented visions shared across the altered human volunteers. Not through words, not exactly, but in bursts of sensory impressions, emotions alien even to them. They described beings of near-limitless energy, shapers of worlds and stars, beings so ancient that to them all modern species existed in the blink of an eye. And these ancients, with powers seemingly godlike, had built cracks into their own existence, not by accident or ill intent, but as a fail-safe measure. They built them into the fabric of developing species across thousands of star systems, species like humans. They left behind the means to heal themselves, should some existential rupture shatter their reality. But like an emergency broadcast sent across centuries, the original creators were long gone, the message only now coming clear. It wasn't just humans who were tinker toys, it was everything. This world, the vault, the signal, it was humanity's inheritance meant to fix a cosmos-spanning wound even their makers couldn't fully anticipate. There was an almost poetic tragedy woven into the revelation. This wasn't a summons to their grand architects, but to a funeral of sorts, not the passing of an individual, but of the concept of singular masterminds, shaping and guiding the evolution of existence. For every vault, every manipulated planet and genetic tweak, they now understood, was a desperate act in a losing battle against the inevitable decay of everything, against entropy itself. And as one chapter slammed shut, a new one was forced open. Not one of dominance, but of stewardship, an impossible duty entrusted to fragile creatures, not because they were special, but because they were there. This shift in understanding sparked a revolution unseen in a millennium. Arguments over galactic supremacy faded, replaced by an unprecedented cooperation fueled by desperation, humility, and an ember of audacious hope. Xyrath found herself bridging the gap not just between her fragmented species, but between all, as they pooled resources and expertise. That artificial world became a hub, part scientific institute, part pilgrimage site, as those touched by alien meddling ventured inwards, guided by cryptic sensory fragments pieced together by the human explorers. And with newfound urgency the focus shifted toward unravelling the directions. It took generations, painstaking research and experimentation born from fear and duty rather than raw curiosity. Then breakthroughs sparked across distant systems, one after another. Anomalous particles were stabilized, a decaying hyperstar brought back into safe balance, rifts that gnawed at the edge of known space slowly patched over. In acts both cosmic and microscopic, they defied the inevitable entropic collapse of the universe. In doing so, a profound philosophical change swept through star nations. No longer focused solely on survival and acquisition, but on preservation. Each species found their niche in this cosmic endeavour, humanity surprisingly excelling in the most daunting roles. With an ironic twist, their unique history allowed them to grasp the grand-scale manipulations of their stellar forebears. That tinkering left echoes in their collective gene pool, faint imprints of understanding left from the cosmic architects. Humans became adept at interpreting these remnants of intent. Each success fueled the next, like an engine slowly powering up after eons of stagnation. No, the ancients hadn't vanished out of malice or some tragic catastrophe. They'd simply run out of time, dwindling into nothingness from the relentless assault of entropy. The torch they left behind was barely smouldering, and now a motley collection of squabbling young races would determine whether it would reignite or fizzle and die, taking the very universe with it. This, then, was the legacy of humanity, not warriors, not savants, but caretakers of a vast cosmic garden, left to them by gardeners long turned to dust. This task became their myth, their legend, their driving purpose. For the first time since the vault opened, Xyrath, now impossibly old by Zaltani standards, felt a strange tranquility. They might never regain what was lost, but here, amongst the tapestry of species, humanity at the beating heart of it all. Perhaps they could prevent any further loss. That she was willing to dedicate her remaining life, and many more after, towards achieving.
In the unfathomable silence of space, your screams vanish into nothingness. But here, within the cold, metallic confines of an alien prison cell, they echo endlessly, a stark reminder of my predicament. My name is David Armstrong, a sergeant in the United Earth Forces, and currently an unwilling occupant of this grim, otherworldly cell. The room is a perfect cube, its walls adorned with cryptic symbols that seem to dance in the dim light, casting long, distorted shadows. I sit on the hard floor, my back against the cold steel, contemplating my next move. This isn't where I imagined I'd be when I enlisted. Raised in the dilapidated outskirts of old London, the military was a beacon of hope, an escape from the destitution and despair of my childhood. Yet here I am, light years away from home, caught in the grip of an intergalactic wear. My captor, Commander Zorax, is a formidable figure. His towering presence is accentuated by his deep blue skin and eyes that glow like embers in a dying fire. His voice, when he speaks, rumbles like thunder, and his laughter, cruel and mocking, haunts the corridors of this alien stronghold. I remember the day he first came to my cell. His towering frame filled the doorway, his laughter echoing off the walls as he ridiculed Earth's attempts to resist their onslaught. "Fragile humans," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. So easily shattered, so quick to fall. But his words, meant to break me, only steeled my resolve. Humans are resilient, adaptable, unyielding. We may bend, but we don't break easily. During my imprisonment, I've been watching and learning. Every aspect of their technology, every word of their language, every nuance of their behavior has been a lesson. Each encounter with Zorax, each patrol by the guards, has provided invaluable insights. He thinks I'm defeated, but he couldn't be more wrong. I've been planning, biding my time for the right moment to strike. The alien guards have a routine, and I've committed it to memory. Their rounds, their habits, their weaknesses, all catalogued meticulously in my mind. Among them is one who seems different, the one with a limp. His eyes occasionally betray a hint of sympathy, a fleeting glimpse of compassion. Perhaps he could be an ally, or at least a less formidable obstacle. As I strategize my next move, memories of my past life on Earth flood my mind. Growing up on those mean streets taught me more about survival than any military training could. My mother, a nurse who worked tirelessly to keep us afloat, always believed in me. "David, you're meant for greater things," she'd say, her tired eyes brimming with hope. Her words, once a source of inspiration, now serve as a fuel for my determination. A clang at the door jolts me from my reverie. The time for Zorax's daily taunting ritual has arrived. I rise to my feet, standing tall, a defiant smirk playing on my lips. He may think he's broken me, but I'm far from defeated. In this game of survival, the underestimated often hold the advantage. It's a lesson I learned on the streets of London, and one I'm about to teach Commander Zorax. Because, in the harsh expanse of the galaxy, as on the streets back home, it's not just about how hard you can hit, but about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. The door opens and Zorax steps in, his usual sneer plastered across his face. "Ready for another day, human?" he mocks. I meet his gaze, unflinching, my resolve unwavering. This may be his domain, but I'm not just another helpless captive. I am David Armstrong, a soldier of Earth, and I will not go down without a fight. As Zorax begins his routine tirade, I listen intently, not just to his words, but to the subtle inflections in his voice, the slight shifts in his body language. Every detail is a potential key to my escape, a possible crack in the armor of my captor. I've always been good at reading people, a skill honed on the unpredictable streets of my youth. And now, it's more valuable than ever. Zorax's overconfidence is his weakness, his arrogance a blind spot. He sees me as a defeated enemy, a broken spirit, but he's gravely mistaken. Beneath this facade of compliance, my mind is racing, piecing together a plan from every scrap of knowledge I've gathered. As he turns to leave, his laughter still echoing in the cell, I sit down again, my eyes fixed on the door. The time for action is drawing near. I can feel it in my bones, a simmering energy, a burning desire for freedom and vengeance. I close my eyes, taking a deep breath. The stakes are high and the risks are immense. But I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about striking a blow for humanity, for showing these aliens that we are not to be underestimated, that our spirit is unbreakable. And when the moment comes, I'll be ready. Ready to turn the tables on Commander Zorax, to turn his laughter into regret. Because in the end, it's not the laughter of your enemies that defines you, but how you rise above it. In the ensuing days, my cell transformed from a cage to a classroom. Every interaction with my captors, every mechanical whir and electronic beep was a lesson. I wasn't just David Armstrong, prisoner. I was David Armstrong, the student of an alien culture, intricately plotting his escape. Commander Zorax's visits became more frequent, his arrogance ballooning with each sneer. But his overconfidence was my advantage. I noted every detail, the way he spoke, the technology he used, the layout of the prison, storing each piece in the puzzle of my escape. One crucial element was the biometric scanner outside my cell. I observed its operation, noting a slight delay in its locking mechanism. It was a minor flaw, but in the art of escape, minor flaws were gaping opportunities. Then there was Tharks, the guard with a limp, whose eyes held a story of their own. Unlike the others, there was a hint of empathy, a touch of reluctance in his demeanor. Through brief conversations, I learned about his family, his uncertainty about the war. He wasn't a friend, but he wasn't a fervent enemy either. In the grand chessboard of my escape, Tharks was a piece yet to be moved, potentially pivotal. The plan, simple in its essence but complex in its execution, revolved around exploiting the scanner's delay during the guard's shift change. Once out, I would navigate the labyrinthine corridors to the communications room. There, I would send a distress signal to Earth's forces. It was audacious, perilous, and the only shot I had. Nights were spent in mental rehearsals, visualizing each step, each turn in the corridors, every potential obstacle. My past life, from the streets of London to military training, had been a crucible forging skills I now relied upon, skills that were about to be tested to their limits. The chosen day arrived with my heart in my throat. The guard's routine check found me feigning sleep. Tharks's glance lingered, a silent exchange passing between us. He left, the door hissing shut. It was time. Counting the seconds, I sprang into action at the precise moment. My hand pressed against the scanner, exploiting the delay. The door slid open, and I slipped out into the corridor, a shadow among shadows. The prison's bowels were a maze of dimly lit corridors, the hum of alien technology a constant companion. I moved with purpose, every sense heightened, every lesson learned in my captivity guiding me. Reaching the communication room was a dance of stealth and speed. The door, secured by an advanced lock, yielded to techniques born on Earth's streets. Inside, alien consoles blinked in the semi-darkness, a symphony of lights and sounds. I approached the main console, my hands moving over unfamiliar controls with a mix of intuition and remembered observations. As I worked, the console's alien language started making sense, a puzzle coming together under desperate fingers. The signal was almost ready to send when an alarm shattered the silence. They had discovered my absence. Heart pounding, I continued. The console beeped its compliance, and with a final push, the distress signal was sent. I stood back, a fleeting moment of triumph quickly overshadowed by the sound of approaching footsteps. The door burst open, guards flooding in with weapons drawn. I was outnumbered, outgunned, but not defeated. The message was sent. That was all that mattered. I was roughly escorted back to my cell, the guards gripped tighter, their faces a mask of frustration. Zorax awaited, his usual sneer replaced with a scowl. "Clever attempt, human," he growled, "but futile. Your people won't come for you. You are alone." His words were meant to wound, but as our eyes met, I saw it. A flicker of doubt, a shadow of fear. He knew, as I did, that humans are relentless. We don't yield, we endure, we fight back. In the solitude of my cell, thoughts of my mother surfaced. Her unwavering faith in me, her belief that I was destined for something greater, filled me with a sense of purpose. I might not have achieved greatness in the way she imagined, but in that moment, I had stood against tyranny. I had fought for something beyond myself, for humanity. As I sat there, the weight of my actions sinking in, I realized this was more than a fight for survival. It was a testament to the human spirit, to our unbreakable will. We might be outmatched, outgunned, but we're never out of the fight. The distress signal was a beacon in the dark, a call to my people across the stars. Whether they received it, whether they could come for me, was unknown. But hope, like the human spirit, is resilient. It endures, even in the darkest of cells, under the watchful eyes of a fearsome enemy. As the hours passed, I lay there not in defeat, but in anticipation. My actions had set something in motion, a ripple across the cosmos. And in the grand scheme of things, a single ripple can precede a tidal wave. Zorax might have had the upper hand, but the game was far from over. In the echoing corridors of an alien prison, a human soldier had defied the odds, had stood up to his captors. And in the endless dance of war and survival sometimes, that's all it takes. In the aftermath of my failed escape attempt, the mood in the prison shifted. The guards were more vigilant, their patrols more frequent. Commander Zorax's visits ceased, replaced by a cold, unsettling silence. Yet, within that silence, hope flickered. My message had been sent. Now, all I could do was wait. Days blurred into nights, the monotonous routine of my captivity only broken by the occasional distant rumble of what I assumed were spacecraft. I wondered if my signal had been received, if my efforts had been in vain. The uncertainty was a gnawing presence in my mind, an uninvited companion in my solitary cell. Then, one night, the prison was shaken by a series of distant explosions. The ground trembled, the walls vibrated. I rose to my feet, heart racing. This was no ordinary event. Something was happening. The sounds of chaos grew closer. Shouts, the unmistakable discharge of blaster fire, the clanging of alarms. My pulse quickened. Could it be? Had the Earth forces received my message? Were they here to rescue me? The door to my cell burst open, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. Earth Forces soldiers, clad in battle armor, were engaged in a fierce firefight with the alien guards. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal. "Lieutenant Armstrong," a voice called out. I turned to see Captain Elena Martinez, a familiar face from my unit, her eyes fierce behind her visor. "We got your signal. We're here to get you out." Relief flooded through me, a tide of emotions I struggled to contain. I nodded, stepping into the fray. The training and instincts honed over years kicked in. Side by side with my rescuers, we fought our way through the corridors, a symphony of blaster fire and determination. As we moved, I relayed everything I knew about the prison layout, the guard rotations, the weaknesses I had observed. Every piece of information was a weapon in our arsenal, every detail a step closer to freedom. The path to the extraction point was a labyrinth of danger. We encountered pockets of resistance, alien guards fighting with a ferocity born of desperation. But we were undeterred. We were soldiers of Earth, fighting not just for survival, but for humanity. As we neared the extraction point, a final obstacle stood in our way. Commander Zorax himself, flanked by his elite guards. His eyes blazed with fury, his voice thundering with rage. You will not leave this place alive, human scum. The ensuing battle was a maelstrom of violence. Zorax was a formidable opponent, his strength and skill honed by years of combat. But he was not invincible. Amidst the chaos, I spotted an opening, a brief moment when his guard was down. With every ounce of strength, I lunged forward, tackling Zorax to the ground. We struggled, our combat a clash of wills as much as strength. But in the end, it was humanity's unyielding spirit that prevailed. With a final effort, I disarmed Zorax, his weapon clattering to the floor. The battle around us ceased, the alien guards surrendering as their commander was defeated. Panting, I stood over Zorax, my fellow soldiers rallying around me. In that moment, I was more than just a soldier. I was a symbol of Earth's resilience, of our refusal to be conquered. We made our way to the extraction point where a shuttle awaited. As we ascended into the stars, I looked back at the alien prison, a now distant speck in the vastness of space. It had been my cage, my crucible, and now it was part of my past. The journey back to Earth was a time of reflection. I thought of my mother, of her unwavering belief in me. I thought of my fellow soldiers, of the sacrifices made in the name of freedom. And I thought of what lay ahead, a future uncertain, but filled with the promise of hope. As we entered Earth's orbit, a sense of awe filled me. Our planet, a blue jewel against the backdrop of space, was a reminder of what we fought for. Home, humanity, a future. The war was far from over, but we had struck a significant blow against our enemies. We had shown them the strength of the human spirit, the power of resilience. My story, a tale of captivity and escape, of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, was just one among many. But it was a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. We were a species that faced adversity with courage, that rose from the ashes of defeat with a renewed determination. As the shuttle touched down, I stepped onto Earth's soil, a free man once more. The battle scars I bore were not just marks of survival, but of triumph. In the echoes of my valor, in the tales of my struggle, the message was clear. Humanity would never yield, never falter. We would stand, united and unbreakable, against whatever challenges the cosmos threw our way. For in the heart of every human soldier, in the soul of every Earth citizen, burned an unquenchable fire, the fire of hope, of perseverance, of an unwavering determination to endure, to overcome, to prevail. And as long as that fire burned, humanity would always have the last laugh.
The bridge of the Orion crackled with barely contained despair. Earth, a shimmering blue marble nestled against the vast emptiness of space, burned brightly on the holoscreen. Zandari battleships swarmed the broken remnants of the planetary fleet, streaks of light marking the obliteration of humanity's final defense. Commander Anya Sokolov, her stoic mask barely concealing the weight of an entire species on her shoulders, gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. It was over. After decades of fighting, of retreat and relentless loss, the cradle of humanity had fallen. Her voice, usually so strong and sure, was a broken whisper. "Comms, open a general channel." "Ma'am?" Lieutenant Jafari hesitated, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Do it!" Anya snapped, and Jafari, with the tiniest flinch, carried out the order. Moments later, the mocking insectoid voice of the Zandari Grand Overseer filled the bridge. "Ah, Commander Sokolov," he chortled, barely disguised glee vibrating in the distorted speech. "I do so enjoy the sound of surrender. Is there some specific ritual your primitive race prefers? Some grovelling, perhaps?" Anya glared at the projection of the Zandari's chitinous face, her spine stiffening. "Just came to give you one last look at what you're destroying, monster." The Overseer let out a booming insectoid laugh. "Your defiance is quaint. Perhaps I will keep a sample of your kind, an amusing reminder of how truly superior the Zandari Empire is." A grim smile flitted across Anya's face. "Protocol Omega," she said firmly. "Authorization, Sokolov Theta X-45. At the far end of the bridge, Ensign Torres looked up in alarm. "Commander, you can't. Omega violates—" "I said authorization, Ensign," Anya bellowed. Every eye on the bridge was locked on her in stunned horror. Reluctantly, Torres tapped out the codes on her terminal. Within the Orion's most secure databanks, layers of ancient encryption peeled away, revealing an abomination buried there for centuries, an abomination humanity hoped to never use. Across the ravaged surface of Earth, hidden installations dormant since the Cold Wars crackled back to life. Automated systems sprang to attention, responding to the Omega Directive. Missile silos opened, launch pad lights flared, and deep within Earth's bowels something far more terrible stirred from its long slumber. The Xandari overseer froze as warnings lit up his own bridge. What is this? Some archaic human weapon system? A second alarm chimed, triangulating launch points, global energy surge. No, he whispered, disbelief washing over him as the realization dawned. No, you wouldn't dare. Anya watched the fear contort the overseer's face. She felt a flicker of satisfaction amidst the despair. For too long, humanity had been on the back foot, retreating, adapting, using guerrilla tactics to stem the inexorable Xandari advance. The war had exacted a brutal toll, systems burned, planets turned to ash, billions exterminated. Now at the bitter end, it was time for those responsible to understand what humans feared most about themselves. A species pushed to the precipice, their backs against the wall, had nothing left to lose. That's when they were at their most unpredictable, most defiant, their most dangerous. What wouldn't we dare? Anya responded coldly. You hunted us across the stars, exterminated our colonies, burned our homeworld. What wouldn't we do to ensure such a thing never happens again? Back on Earth, the first streaks of light pierced the clouds, not missiles. These were different, larger, slower. Each trail was an arc of searing blue energy, tearing upwards against gravity. Anya knew that for many of her crew, witnessing the Omega Directive was like seeing a ghost story brought to life. This was an apocalypse of humanity's own making, designed to ensure, if they fell, nobody could ever claim victory over Earth. Transorbital kinetic bombardment, the Xandari overseer croaked, now clearly gripped by an abject terror that contrasted starkly with his previous arrogance. As the overseer scrambled, giving panicked orders, one thought was laser-focused in Anya's mind. It's too late to save everyone. Too many systems were lost, too many sacrifices already made. But she could damn well ensure these conquerors paid a price greater than they could possibly imagine. This, at last, was the reckoning for Earth. Kinetic strike zones designated Priority Alpha, Torres stated, a hollow tone in her voice as she listed the areas marked for devastation. Nearly every Xandari surface installation across the occupied planet. Humanity would reclaim Earth, even if they had to scorch it in the process. At the heart of the Xandari flagship, the overseer let out a primal screech of horror and rage. Retreat! All ships! Full evacu! His panicked transmission was cut short as the first kinetic rods struck home. Massive slugs of reinforced tungsten alloy, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, slammed into Earth with the force of extinction-level asteroids. No shields were powerful enough to stop them. On impact, they punched through the surface as easily as meteors through water. Aboard the Orion, hushed gasps and stifled whimpers rippled through the bridge. Even those who knew what Protocol Omega entailed seemed unprepared for the reality of its implementation. Below, Earth was becoming an inferno, each impact like the wrath of an old god. The holoscreen blinked out as their view was obscured by monstrous clouds of debris. Then came the second phase, deep beneath the scarred surface of the Earth, in chambers sealed during the darkest hours of mankind's past, ancient seismic generators roared back to life. Their creators had called them tectonic amplifiers, machines built to focus and unleash the primal dormant energy churning beneath the Earth's crust. For an agonizing minute, nothing seemed to happen. Then an almost imperceptible shudder ran through the Orion as the unthinkable force was unleashed deep within the Earth. Fault lines groaned to life. Continents quivered. Massive chunks of the Xandari-occupied continents split, swallowed by widening gaps as the seismic amplifiers destabilized the very tectonic plates of the planet. On the Xandari flagship, total chaos reigned. Consoles exploded, crew members were hurled violently about. Even as the overseer screamed desperate commands, the ship tilted violently, internal supports twisting with a protesting screech of metal. "Ma'am," Jafari shouted, "the Xandari, they're in pandemonium!" A fierce smile twisted Anya's lips. They weren't simply annihilating Zandari forces. The kinetic bombardment and seismic chaos was tearing apart the conquered lands they occupied, rendering them permanently unstable. Humanity was denying them not just victory, but the very spoils of their war. "Contact any ships still able to jump. Tell them to get clear," she ordered, her voice regaining a touch of the iron command that earned her the leadership of the fleet's remnants. She wouldn't allow those not directly responsible for the devastation of Earth to die, a flicker of the old-fashioned humanitarian values of humanity clinging on even now. As the shattered remains of the Zandari armada fled, Anya took a deep breath, her chest aching with loss and a grim sort of triumph. For years her people had survived, always outmatched, always fighting against the odds. They'd become masters of guerrilla warfare, of hit-and-run tactics that bled their enemies slowly. It had not been enough. Now humanity had shown its full teeth. For the first time, the Zandari Empire knew fear. Not fear of loss in battle. This was existential fear, the dawning horror that they'd pushed a seemingly inferior race too far and awakened a monster. With Earth now an uninhabitable tomb with any possible survivors of the initial invasion stranded on a broken fragment of their conquest, humanity had proven that even total, overwhelming defeat would not crush their defiant spirit. There would be no negotiations, no offers of reparations, no surrender. Earth's final chapter might be written in fire and brimstone, but from those ashes would rise a humanity with a burning desire for vengeance. That was Anya's gamble. That the price paid today would give humanity the space to breathe, to rebuild, and come back even stronger. "Ensign Torres," she barked, forcing a measure of control back into her voice. "Scan for survivors. Deploy recon drones. I want a full assessment of the Zandari losses and any pockets of our own people still left." "Ma'am, that planet down there." Torres sounded as if she couldn't quite believe her own readings. "The seismic destabilization. It's not stopping." Anya frowned, turning her gaze back to the projection showing what was left of their home. Earth hung shrouded in smoke and dust, great chasms visible even from orbit. The seismic destabilization process was still accelerating, cracks spider-webbing across the continents. A cold tremor ran down her spine. They hadn't meant to unleash total planetary destruction. "Commander," Jafari barked, "new energy readings. It's the seismic generators." A map appeared on the hollow screen, a network of subterranean installations thrumming with activity far beyond the limits they were meant to operate at. This wasn't deliberate sabotage by dying Zandari. This was critical system failure triggered by the sheer stress put on the tectonic amplifiers. Earth's internal pressure was building, ready to erupt. Anya gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles were bloodless. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The planet, her home, it was going to tear itself apart. There was nothing they could do to stop it. The realization sent a shockwave through the Orion's bridge. Anya understood. They'd not simply wounded the Zandari, they'd mortally wounded themselves. For all her cold calculation, this went beyond anything she had anticipated. It was one thing to sacrifice lives in battle, or even sacrifice Earth itself, to deny any enemy victory. But what they had done here was unleash an apocalypse, for which there was no escape. It transcended war, it was extinction. "Commander," Jafari said, his voice barely a whisper, "if Earth's core destabilizes—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. A destabilized Earth would be like a cosmic hand grenade, the ripple effects across the system catastrophic. Asteroid fields would be disturbed, potentially endangering neighboring planets. The delicate balance of their star system would be irrevocably altered. Waves of horror and revulsion swept through Anya, threatening to swallow her. Protocol Omega had only ever been discussed as a horrific absolute last resort, an unimaginable weapon only to be used if the alternative was the extermination of the entire human race. Its true scope had never been truly tested or even fully understood. Amidst the despair, an icy determination surged within her. "Lieutenant," she barked, forcing a semblance of command back into her voice, "send every able ship into the outer rings of the system. They need to clear out asteroid fields. Do whatever they can to minimize the cascading effects. Torres, begin plotting every known colony or human outpost. Contact them, warn them." There was a pregnant pause, then quietly, "Ma'am, the Orion isn't built for that kind of work." Lieutenant Jafari trailed off, the unspoken implication clear. This was likely a one-way mission. A bleak smile flickered across Anya's lips. Well then, it seems humanity gave me one final battle to fight, just a different kind than expected. Lieutenant, you have the bridge. But Commander, that's an order, Anya interrupted, her voice sharp. She wouldn't allow them to disobey, not out of pity for her, but out of a sense of duty to whatever shreds of humanity were left out there in the darkness. They wouldn't survive. Their small starship had neither the fuel nor the resilience required for the gargantuan task ahead. But every rock cleared from the path of an asteroid might buy another colony a precious extra day, extra time to prepare or find shelter from the coming upheaval. Anya left the bridge without looking back. It was done. Now it was time to see the consequences of her decisions. She made her way down deserted corridors, past panicked crew members scrambling to fulfill their assignments. She found herself in the Orion's observation deck, once a place for admiring the vastness of space, now filled with a strange dread. Before her, Earth burned not with the brilliant flashes of kinetic strikes, but with an ominous inner glow, like a coal smouldering from within. Cracks widened at an appalling rate, spreading outward from the initial impact zones. Oceans swelled and retreated, leaving vast stretches of seafloor exposed, nature itself reeling from the tectonic chaos. Within her chest, a cold numbness battled with a torrent of emotions. Remorse at what she'd set in motion, fury at the Zandari, and at herself for resorting to such destructive measures. But beneath that throbbed a fierce pang of pride. They had been brought to the brink, backed into a corner, left with almost nothing. Yet they had done the unthinkable. From now on, every civilization in the galaxy would remember the name of humanity. They wouldn't just be remembered as victims or as the species that fought bravely even while outnumbered. They would be whispered about as the race that had the sheer gall to destroy their own home planet, rather than submit, that turned annihilation into a weapon. "Commander!" A hesitant voice startled her. She turned to see Ensign Torres, eyes red-rimmed, fear and respect warring in her young face. "Ensign," Anya acknowledged with a nod. The formalities felt both absurd and curiously comforting in this cataclysmic moment. "There were pockets of survivors found," Torres reported. "The underground shelters." Her voice caught. "Some people made it." A flicker of hope bloomed in Anya's chest. "How many? Give me some good news for once, Ensign." A shaky smile touched Torres' lips. "Thousands, ma'am. Evacuation is already underway." Relief surged through Anya like a jolt. Earth might be lost, but some sliver of their civilization had miraculously survived her gamble. "And the Overseer?" Anya asked, the question biting her tongue. Part of her still wanted to know that the architect of all this suffering had also perished. Torres' expression became grim. "Their flagship was one of the few that managed to jump in time. I'm sorry, he escaped." Disappointment clawed at Anya, yet with surprising ease she let it go. The Zandari survivors would carry the story of Earth within them, a story passed down, generation to generation, a warning about the lengths an unassuming corner of the cosmos would go when pushed to the limit. Even as Earth tore itself apart around them, Anya felt an odd flicker of satisfaction amidst the despair. This was their legacy. She returned her gaze to the shattered world before her. With growing horror and awe, they watched as the first great chunk of continental shelf broke free, hurtling into the cosmos, leaving behind a gaping wound. More soon followed, fragments of her home flung outward, forever adrift in the silent vastness. Her knees weak, Anya sank to the floor. They might not have conventional victory, but the destruction in front of her. This was her doing. No matter the strategic arguments or self-righteous justification, she carried the crushing weight of her decision. Earth was well and truly lost. "Ma'am, look!" Ensign Torres gasped, her voice laced with awe. Amidst the chaos, something spectacular emerged, a shimmer of emerald green. At first, Anya mistook it for an atmospheric distortion. Then, as her eyes widened, she realized its true nature. From the heart of their world, the planet's lifeblood, the aurora borealis, surged like a beacon, twisting and turning impossibly, reaching up as if defiant, a final dance before the dark night. Perhaps it was a simple trick of the dying light, or her shattered mind seeing hope where none existed, but for a moment Anya glimpsed in that ethereal brilliance a symbol of humanity itself, battered, broken, but unyielding. Even at the end, a final gasp of beauty and resilience. In that dying dance of their ravaged world, a flicker of humanity's undying spirit shone brightest. "Ensign," Anya began, her voice trembling and raw, "you see that? Let them all see it. Tell every colony, every ship, every outpost out there, this is us." Torres nodded, understanding in her tear-streaked eyes. Their final defiant act wouldn't just be a horrifying legend, but a symbol too, a signal blazing out that humanity lived on, their spirit unbroken. "I will, Commander. It's going to take some explaining, though." She chuckled, a note of genuine humour slipping past her sorrow. Anya managed a faint smile. It was the end of their world, but somehow not the extinction of their hope. She'd led her people into the abyss, but they'd emerged carrying embers of their defiant spirit. The surviving fleet, the colonies now warned of the looming danger, those pockets of survivors. That was humanity now. Not conquerors, but defiant specks scattered across the cosmos, rebuilding. And one day, perhaps, they'd even seek those shattered pieces of Earth adrift in space, seeking what fragments of home they could reclaim. But first, survival. "Commander," Torres hesitated, "what now?" The question hit like a physical blow. Now came the hardest part. Anya stood back straighter, a leader once more. "Now, we start over. Now we find some place to rest and regroup. But most importantly, now we pass on the story of what happens when you push humanity too far. No matter what happens next, they won't forget us, Ensign. We made damn sure of that." Her own words surprised her. When this mission began, her heart echoed with bleak resolve. Yet, standing before the shattered remains of Earth illuminated by the emerald fire of its own demise, it wasn't despair anchoring her spirit, it was defiance. She couldn't bring back their world, she couldn't undo the horrors they'd unleashed. But, as humanity had risen to every challenge thrown at them throughout history, as their ingenuity had brought them from caves to the stars, she had faith. Even without a planet, even scattered and reeling, humans were survivors. It was woven into the very fabric of their species. For the rest of her days, Anya knew she'd carry the ghosts of those lost and the weight of the apocalyptic decision she had made. But beneath that crushing burden, a spark, small yet undeniably potent, had also been kindled. It was the relentless, irrational spark of resilience that fueled the best and worst of the human spirit. In a corner of their hearts, even as Earth met its violent end, the defiant few clung to that spark. They would fight, they would rebuild, and across the dark vastness of space, the legend of Earth would ignite like a warning flare. From this ruin, humanity would rise again, different but unbroken. Days stretched into weeks. Life aboard the Orion took on a somber, measured rhythm. The devastation within Earth's star system stabilized, leaving the remnants of their world suspended in space, a chilling monument to an apocalypse of their own making. For Anya it was a living nightmare and a source of quiet determination. There were moments when she doubted every decision she'd made. Would humanity look back on her as a saviour or a destroyer? Yet when that doubt tried to swallow her whole, she forced herself to stare out at the void where Earth once thrived. That haunting panorama held her answer. The destruction they'd unleashed was immense, but its purpose fulfilled. The Zandari threat was crippled. The surviving human ships and colonies scattered across the stars now knew of Earth's fate. The message spread faster than any fleet could move. Anya imagined shocked voices whispering the story into the vastness of space, the name of a once seemingly unremarkable species, synonymous with apocalyptic defiance. That legacy was all they had left, a legend cast with sacrifice and desperation. The remnants of the fleet limped toward an old uninhabited human outpost, once deemed too small, too poorly situated to truly colonize. It would now be their sanctuary, a place to rest, assess the grim tally of survivors, and most importantly, plan the uncertain future. "Mum?" Torres tapped tentatively at the door to Anya's sparsely furnished quarters. She looked even younger than her years, but a new tenacity etched lines across her face. "Enter!" Anya's voice was hoarse from disuse. Torres entered carrying a simple metal box she cradled with care. "For you," she said, setting the box on Anya's desk. "One of the recon pods recovered it, drifting with the rest of the debris. I thought you might—" Torres trailed off, eyes wide with unshed tears. Anya pried open the box and gasped. Inside was a broken shard of ceramic, pale blue with fragments of white, a crude child's painting of Earth, an ocean, a sunrise. Nothing valuable, a remnant from before the war when such trinkets littered homes across their lost world. But it was hers, salvaged from the ashes of her greatest sacrifice. Tell them, Anya's voice wavered with emotion. Tell them not to mourn. Tell them to remember and learn, to build something better. Tears spilled over as she closed her fingers around that simple piece of their broken past. It was a memento of what they'd lost and a fragile seed of hope. And so humanity clung to their existence, scattered and scarred. With Earth a memory, they would have to fight fiercely for their place in the cosmos. Anya carried the scars of the choice she'd made, but now her focus was singular, ensuring humanity would become more than what had destroyed their world, more than an object lesson about excessive force. The Orion became a refuge and a symbol, and across the stars, echoes of Earth's final act reached other sentient races, sparking curiosity, caution, and above all respect for these creatures capable of sacrificing everything when cornered. They called it overkill. Humanity might not yet deserve salvation, but they had certainly earned survival.